I want to welcome you to the Retro Rogues Live. Please pay attention to our warning graphic. It states that the Retro Rogues Live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. So if you notice, we didn't do the countdown today. There's some theory that maybe us having music actually affected the stream last week. We're not exactly sure, so we've decided to do with music. Apparently, Facebook is going to be cracking down on all music use on live streams starting in October. There you go. My name is Dave Bay. I'm one of your hosts. I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer for nearly 30 years. I've worked on a lot of fun things that people have heard of, such things as Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, Batman Incorporated, and Flashpoint Wonder Woman. But my current labor of love is my t-shirt business, which is Kirby Tees. You can see more fun things over at kirbytees.com. We've got quite a few designs and different things you can possibly purchase if you would like. We've got a lot of a modest selection of Retro Rogues merchandise over there, but hopefully very soon we'll be unveiling some new designs. There's also some stuff there for Red Skirts if you're a Red Skirts fan. But if you go over there and you purchase a Retro Rogue shirt, it helps to support the show and what we have going on here, and we greatly appreciate that. But enough about that. I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks hopefully watching or listening at home some of the fun things that you have worked on as a creative professional.
Well, right off the bat, I do want to acknowledge Jane saying hello and Bobby saying hello. We're glad to see you folks. We think something happened last week with the stream, and we're trying to figure out what that was because last week we didn't have any comments from the Rogues Gallery. So we're already ahead, Dave. We've already got 2 comments, so that's awesome. So anyway, yes, I am Eric Alexander, also known as Base God 14. You may notice that I actually got my hair cropped. I actually got my hair under control a little bit. Although it's not quite control over here, but that's neither here nor there. But I am Eric Alexander, also known as Bass God 14. That's Bass God 14, not Bass God 14. That's Bass God 14, like a bass guitar. And I am the associate producer of a feature film called Occupants, which features Star Trek Voyager actor Robert Picardo. And it's also directed by a fellow named Russ Emanuel. And I'm currently working on a project with him that I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to share with you folks very soon. We actually have a shoot date in Burbank, which I'm very excited about. So, that's what I've got going on, Dave.
Well, and I thought we could go ahead and acknowledge the thing that's kind of showing up on Facebook, if you don't mind. We're not going to make a big announcement about it tonight, but yes, there is something happening with Red Skirts. There's all kinds of pictures, makeup test pictures that are starting to show up, and I know our makeup artist is very, very super excited about it. So it's might as well go ahead and just, because the cat's kind of out of the bag right now. There is something that's happening. I actually
shared one of those on my personal Facebook account. I shared one of her pictures. So
yeah, so there is something happening. We're not going to get too much further into it right now, but we are working on something for Red Skirts, and I think people are going to be pretty excited when they see what we've got going on. So just throw that out there real quick. So
yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. A little nervous about it, but also excited about it. So should be pretty cool. So, and it's funny because it's something we've been working on for quite some time. I don't think people realize that we've been working on it for quite a while. So yeah, but very cool. Awesome. So our main topic tonight is actually we're going to be talking about Cobra Kai season 1. We kind of started talking about it, and then got kind of stuck on episode 1 pretty much. And we were going to get into season 1. Do we want to go ahead and do Cobra Kai now and then do Mando?
Yeah, I think let's start out with Cobra Kai, and then we can get into Mando. As you mentioned, we are going to be doing a trailer reaction for Mando. The trailer just came out yesterday. So we are going to be having that coming up a little bit later. But I think we might as well start with Cobra Kai, because Cobra Kai is a little bit older, I guess, a little bit more of something that's been around for a while. But I think a lot of people are just now getting into it, thanks to the fact that it's on Netflix. Because I think a lot of people didn't get to check it out before when it was on YouTube Red.
Very true, very true. And then I watched it originally when it was on YouTube Red. and I actually subscribed to YouTube Red specifically for Cobra Kai and watched all of season 1 and really enjoyed the first season of Cobra Kai. And I kind of got ahead of myself and went ahead and watched season 2, and I'll go ahead and say I quite enjoyed season 2 as well. But the 2 seasons are quite different. So the goal last episode was to actually talk about the first 5 episodes of season 1 of Cobra Kai. And then this episode, we were going to talk about the next 5 episodes of season 1. So we'll kind of jump back and forth, but we're going to look at season 1 as a whole tonight. Just because, like I said, we did kind of get stuck on episode 1 a little bit more than we had originally intended. So let's start with just overall general impressions, if that's okay, Eric. What were your overall general impressions of season 1 of Cobra Kai?
Well, I really enjoyed it. I really dig it. What's interesting for me is Dave mentioned like he actually saw this series when it first came out on YouTube Red, and I didn't. I saw like the first 2 episodes, and I actually saw them in a theater at one of those Fathom events where they actually showed the first 2 episodes of Cobra Kai along with the original Karate Kid movie. So that's how I first started to watch Cobra Kai. And then I would hear things about the series, and literally I would look up like the scenes people were talking about on YouTube, which I thought was kind of ironic because here, is a show that was behind a paywall on YouTube, and I'm actually finding out what's going on with it by finding, pirated clips on YouTube of the show. So I didn't actually get to watch it until very recently, until last week. And then I just binged everything on Netflix. I watched the first 5 episodes initially. And then since then, I've binged everything, including season 2. And it's been quite an experience. Prior to that, I'd only seen, like I said, the first 2 episodes of season 1. And then I saw the first episode of season 2 as well. But I knew everything that basically had happened because I was keeping tabs on it. I would read blogs, and I would go to YouTube and I would find certain scenes that people were talking about. And sure enough, somebody had posted it. But what was really been interesting for me, and I mentioned this on the last broadcast we had, what's really been interesting for me is even knowing what's going to happen, even knowing everything that's going to happen in season 1, actually watching it is such a better experience, than just hearing about it, just seeing clips, out of context and stuff like that. Watching the entire progression has really been a lot of fun for me. This is a very, very, very well executed and very well written show, especially season 1. I think you're muted, Dave.
My bad. Sorry. I thoroughly loved season 1. I was pleasantly surprised by it. I knew it would kind of be for me and that I would enjoy it, but I didn't realize I would enjoy it as much as I did. Because I watched the first episode because you could watch the first episode. I think the first 2 episodes you could watch for free. So I remember I watched it and I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. I love Karate Kid. And I knew I would probably hang around, to check out more of the show. But I wasn't sure how well I would like it. And it was kind of weird because season 1 is the season where you can tell they're kind of working with probably I'm going to say this, and I don't mean this in a derogatory manner, but I think you could tell there's a budgetary difference between season 1 and season 2. There's a couple of episodes where it's not that it looks cheap or anything, but you could tell that they're kind of making do sometimes with what they have to work with. And it doesn't affect the production at all. It actually works incredibly well. And it actually gives it sometimes more of an authentic feel than I think it would have had. Because the second season is definitely much more outlandish and much more, for lack of a better term, produced. So
I like outlandish. Because there is a definite difference between season 1 and season 2 in terms of style, tone, all sorts of things. And there's a lot more splash in season 2 than there is in season 1. But I'm not sure that makes it better.
Yeah, and I was going to say that was the same thing I was going to say. But it's interesting because you could kind of see some of that in the first couple of episodes. And I remember there was one episode where there was one scene, but it didn't affect anything. I bought into it more. It felt more authentic, which I was kind of surprised at. And so I stayed with Cobra Kai and paid for YouTube and watched the whole thing for that first season. And then eventually I got rid of my YouTube thing. We all know why. I've talked about it on the show what happened. I had no intention of getting rid of my YouTube Red subscription. I was very excited about Cobra Kai season 2. But basically, I missed season 2 on YouTube because basically YouTube ran me off. So that's about all there was to it. And when I walked away from everything. So I was just like, well, so much for Cobra Kai. I didn't expect I'd get the chance actually to see season 2. I didn't think that we would be talking about it here on the show because I figured it would just stay as a part of YouTube and it would basically be hidden away. It'd be this thing that a lot of people weren't too terribly aware of. But I thoroughly enjoyed season 1. And I can't recommend it enough. And then the fun thing is because now that it is on Netflix, a lot of people are discovering it, and it's a lot of fun. So let's go ahead, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the titles for the 10 episodes that comprise season 1, and let's just talk about it, those particular episodes, maybe favorite moments that we liked or things we thought were really kind of fun or cool that they did, and we'll just kind of work our way through season 1. So I feel like we covered the first episode pretty well, Ace Degenerate, on the last episode. So if you didn't see the last episode, go back, watch last week's episode, and we go on infinitum. We compare it to Karate Kid. We talk about the original Karate Kid. We get all into that. So I think we should just start off with actually episode 2, which was called Strike First. So tell me, Eric, what were your thoughts about, or did you have a favorite scene or anything that really resonated with you with episode 2, Strike First?
Well, I'm looking at like the descriptions right now on IMDb, and it's really interesting to see, the picture that they decide to use to represent the episode. And of course, the picture they use is that very obviously staged moment where you have Johnny and you have Daniel on the mat facing each other the way they did in the original Karate Kid. And there's that sort of tease about, that these guys are going to go at it again. There's going to be a rematch. There's going to be a part 2 of their story, obviously. So,
right.
I think that's a brilliant thing that IMDb did. I'm sure they did that because that's also the way Sony presented it and pushed it and all that kind of stuff. But literally, I'm looking at the image right now, and that's such a great image of the two of them confronting each other. What's also really interesting about that is the flip the script is a huge theme in Cobra Kai, not just for the show itself in terms of that line will be used very soon in the show, but also because that's what the show is trying to do, is trying to flip the script. And that's kind of what happens in that Strike First episode is you have the situation where Daniel thinks that Johnny is, back to his evil ways with Cobra Kai. He hears that Cobra Kai is back. There's that funny moment where, they show just how good Daniel's life is. And he's just kind of going through his normal day and, oh, what a wonderful life I have. And then he sees Cobra Kai at the strip mall and it just destroys the rest of his day. And after that, of course, he starts to get into this thing where he basically believes his daughter's friends and doesn't really look at the other side at all. He's immediately willing to jump into the idea that Johnny's wrong. Johnny's beating up these poor teenagers and stuff like that. And Johnny's, a jerk and a douche and all that kind of stuff. Cobra Kai sucks. And he really doesn't quite understand what's going on because, again, the theme in this show so often is flip the script. And it's not Daniel is not the one who is standing up for the people being bullied at this point. It's Johnny. Johnny's the one standing up for the people being bullied. In this case, just one guy that's basically on his own. And so I really like that, the fact that they do that, and that whole kind of just throwing the whole premise of the entire franchise on its head.
There I go again with my mic muted. Sorry, everyone. So I was having a problem with my fan. I like to have my fan on because it keeps it cool in here. And it's making this really weird screeching noise. So I just turned my fan off. Apologies. That's why it kind of disappeared.
I didn't hear it. Just so you know, I wasn't hearing any weird stuff in the background. You might hear it, but I don't think anybody else can. So
I'll say everyone the weird screech sound it was making. Um, so anyhow, but I wanted to pull this image up. Sorry for that brief momentary thing. I've had an issue with my image viewer when we're doing the live stream lately, but I thought since we're talking about it, let's actually pull up, that kind of now in my mind iconic image of, of course, Daniel face, basically kind of giving it to Johnny and kind of getting on his face. This is obviously later. Actually, this is not from the episode you're talking about, because the one you're talking about actually happens at night. And it's pretty dramatic. It's really well staged the way they set that up. Because that's the other thing I was going to say. The production values on the show are just so well done, and the camera setups are so great. Like, I mean, I don't know if they have a storyboard artist or if they're pre-visiting it or what they're doing, but the setups for this show are so incredible. The way that they just set the stage, and it always seems to work. I don't know if they're just drawing inspiration from the original film specifically, or if there's something else they're looking at, but they do a really good job of setting that camera up and setting a mood. So, yeah, so strike first. So my thought with this one is that I just like, the thing that's interesting about this one too is that, and as a small business owner, you kind of can appreciate some of the stuff that Johnny goes through in this episode, because there's a little bit of time, dealing with things that other people typically don't think of. He's got there's an inspector who walks in and he's like, "Hey, you got to do this and you got to do that and whatever." And it's interesting too. There's also not this episode, but the next episode we'll talk about. There's actually an interesting deleted scene that's been showing up actually on the internet that people are starting to talk about, that actually is an early episode for season 1. But I enjoyed all that kind of silliness, because it kind of shows you that he's having to go through more than what you would think of. A lot of times in certain movies and productions, I don't know if they'd spend a lot of time showing you that stuff. And I thought it was kind of fun that we kind of see him having to go through the trials and travails of, trying to set up a business. And in addition to that too, just some of the challenges that he's facing. I thought that was interesting. So it's not a big dramatic moment like the one that you kind of singled out, Eric, but it's something I personally find, really interesting and entertaining.
Well, it also fits with that whole, again, the flip the script thing, because you have the situation now where Johnny is not the rich kid anymore. He's not the privileged kid anymore, that has all the friends and everything like that. Daniel's that guy now. Daniel's this very successful businessman who has this very popular car dealership, who's really living the life and living large. And Johnny's not that guy. He used to be that guy, but he ain't that guy anymore. And I think that's another thing that's really interesting, because you have that contrast between sort of the big successful corporate type and the little guy, the small businessman.
And it's interesting too that the song that Daniel's listening to is "Kick in the Head." The lyric anyway is "Kick in the Head." It's kind of funny how they found that song and how it works really well to kind of reflect Daniel's mood, but at the same point kind of echo obviously the kick in the head that's continuing to, kind of come back, to kind of haunt him. Even though he won, that kick in the head really comes back to haunt him, definitely over the course of season 1. To the point that as in a later episode, we see that actually kind of, thrown back in his face. So it's interesting. It's interesting how they do that.
Yeah.
So do you have anything else you want to highlight about this episode, or are we good to move on to the next one?
No, I think we can move on to the next one.
Okay. So very good. All right. So episode 3 was called Esqueleto, maybe? Might be pronouncing that wrong. And in this one, I'll just go ahead and read the synopsis here just real quick, because I realized maybe we should just do the synopsis real quick. So it basically just says Miguel helps Johnny advertise Cobra Kai on the web. Daniel agrees to chaperone at the Halloween dance so he can keep an eye on his daughter. This is an interesting episode. So tell me, Eric, what was kind of like the standout moment for me? I'm very curious. What was your standout moment from this particular episode?
Well, what's interesting for me is, I actually, I have daughters. And so it's kind of interesting for me to see Daniel's perspective as far as him trying to keep tabs on his daughter. I think I touched on it, I think, last time, but I didn't emphasize it enough. I don't really like Daniel's wife, okay? And the reason I don't like Daniel's wife is because she kind of defends this. She's kind of defending what I think is some bad choices by her daughter and trying to basically use the fact that she wants to be popular and all that kind of stuff as a justification for the bad choices that she's making. Whereas Daniel, I think, is just trying to be a good dad. And quite frankly, good dad's going to embarrass you. That's what good dads do. They're going to embarrass the hell out of you, especially when you're a teenager and you're in high school. That's what a good dad does. And so I can totally feel for Daniel's position in this and that he wants to keep an eye on his daughter. And also, we have to remember, we as viewers know the guy that Daniel's daughter is dating is a piece of shit. He is a bad news. Okay. So for me, that gives me even more, more of a push to say that Daniel's perspective is a good one, and it makes a lot of sense that he would want to do this, and he'd want to keep an eye out on his daughter. They do set him up pretty good as far as what actually happens. That he gets set up pretty good as far as thinking one thing and it's something else that's actually going on. But that does come into play later, as far as what's the falling out that Sam eventually is going to have with this guy. But he does get set up pretty good as far as what he thinks is going on and what is actually going on at this party. So I related to that pretty well. I think that was pretty interesting. I totally get it. I totally get Daniel's perspective of what he was doing, and I get why Sam is embarrassed ultimately by the actions of the father. But hey, that's what a good father does, as opposed to the mother who's just like, oh, well, she's just trying to be popular. It's totally okay that she treats her best friend like shit because she's not popular. That's cool. That's fine. She just wants to be popular. That's fine. It's all good, right?
Well, it's interesting because there's in preparation for the show, I have watched so many theory videos on Cobra Kai. It is absolutely insane. And you'd be surprised how many theory videos there are that basically say that Samantha is the real villain of Cobra Kai.
Okay.
So, yeah. Which is kind of weird, but when you look at it in context, you can kind of see it. It's kind of her and her friends' kind of poor choices that kind of help to really set these motions, these events kind of in motion.
No, that's totally justifiable. Yeah, that's absolutely. She is the center of the bad choices in both seasons, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
She's the center of all the bad choices that end up getting other people into a lot of trouble, and really getting people hurt really bad.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because in a weird way, kind of through her, even though it's not the same thing at all. It is interesting to see her making the choices that she makes and how it impacts everyone, because it kind of makes you wonder, like, if Elizabeth Shue comes to the show, right, and does several episodes, I would like to see them do with her what they've done with everyone else and actually kind of give us kind of some of these events from her perspective, because I'd really like to see what motivated sometimes her decision making, that caused her to make some of the decisions that she made. Like I think that and seeing Samantha's choices even makes me even want to see that even more, so that I can better understand why Allie made some of the decisions she made in the original, Karate Kid film. Because you look at the impact that it's had on these two guys here. I mean, it warrants at least a little investigation. So I hope they do that. They probably won't, but that's just something I'd like to personally see. So for me, I think the big iconic moment in this one is obviously, at the Halloween party when Miguel shows up in his costume.
Absolutely.
They got the slow-mo, they've got the smoke. Daniel freaks out. It's just that moment to me is the big moment. And it's just kind of fun to see. And it's weird because I never thought, as a huge fan of the original Karate Kid film and definitely being on Daniel's side when I was a kid, I was surprised to see what an empowering moment that is for Miguel. And I'm rooting for him, but at the same point, you see the effect that it has on Daniel, and you're like, wait a minute, should I feel this way? Should I be rooting for him? And that's the interesting thing about this show, is that you find yourself rooting for someone, and then they do something horribly irresponsible, or they make a really bad choice, and you're like going, ooh, maybe I shouldn't be rooting for this person. But then again, you realize they're all flawed human beings, and it's okay to root for who you want to root for. Because I've said before, I'm a big Miguel fan.
Yeah.
My fandom for Miguel has lasted both seasons. Good choices, bad choices. I feel like Miguel is a good kid who's just caught up in the minutia of the rivalry between these two men and all the teen drama that I think that everyone finds themselves in when they're that age.
Well, one thing I mentioned before, and I think you see it more in season 1 than in season 2, because in season 2, this kind of goes away. A little minor spoiler alert, but in season 1, Miguel still has his own story going on. He's not just paralleling, basically, it's not just about him being affected by Johnny and Daniel's rivalry. No, he's got his own problems that started before the show started. That obviously he's had problems with these guys for a long time, and it's just starting to come to a head at the point that we find him. But he's already had problems with these guys. So he's already sort of dealing with this and dealing with the fact that he is not popular, that he is not rich, that he doesn't have any of those advantages. And he's just trying to make his way. That's all he's trying to do. He's just has nothing to do with Johnny, has nothing to do with Daniel. Obviously, those things get all caught up together. And of course, with Sam very much in the middle of all of it, and in a lot of ways an instigator of some of it. But he is, at least at this point in season 1, he still very much has his own story. And he is not really caught up in the whole Johnny Daniel thing. I think that takes more of a life of its own in season 2. But at this point, he's just trying to deal with his own problems. And nobody is really helping him except for Johnny. Johnny is the only one helping this kid who is having all these problems. Nobody else is, not his parents, which, he's got a kind of a weird family situation going. They're not really helping him. His friends, they're not really helping him. They're just as bad off as he is. So the only person that's really helping him at this point is Johnny.
And it's interesting too, because you definitely see it in the early episodes much more, but it's very interesting as we kind of see and learn more about Miguel's home life. It is interesting how Miguel's home life very much, echoes or mirrors a lot of what was happening with Daniel in the original Karate Kid film. It really feels like you're following a new Karate Kid in Miguel. But the difference is that his Mr. Miyagi, of all people, is Johnny Lawrence, which is very interesting to see the transformation that Miguel goes through. Now, unless you have anything else you want to add for this one, I thought we could go ahead and go to the next episode. But somewhere between, I'm going to call this out, somewhere between episodes 3 and 4, there is a deleted scene that some people have actually posted on YouTube, which of course makes sense. You should go to YouTube to watch it. But if you go to YouTube and search it out, there's some people that have been talking about some of these deleted scenes. And somewhere between 3 and 4, there was a scene that they shot. I don't know if you saw it, Eric.
I don't think so.
Johnny is walking around with the flyers, and he's promoting Cobra Kai. And he's actually outside of a Brazilian jiu-jitsu dojo. And so he comes walking up, and he sees these kids and geese. He's like, hey, instead of rolling around on the mat, you guys should definitely check out karate. And he's like handing them flyers and stuff. And this makes the sensei mad. And then the sensei comes out, and the sensei's like, hey, are you trying to poach my students? He's like, no, I just figured they want to learn a real martial art. Which, of course, makes this jiu-jitsu sensei mad. And it's kind of funny because you should just watch the clip. I don't want to spoil it, but there's a bunch of funny bits that come out of that. But basically, as they go back and forth, it looks like they're going to fight. And so Johnny gets into like a bit of a combative stance, and the jiu-jitsu guys getting ready to actually react. And you hear a little police, where they just kind of have the police siren kind of go off just one time, like, hey, break it up. And then Johnny's like, you're lucky I'm on parole. And then he walks off. It's a great little scene.
That sounds perfect. I don't know why they would delete that. That sounds like perfect. One of the things that they don't touch on a lot in Karate Kid that would be a little bit more fun to play with is the rivalries between the different martial arts and things like that. So I really wish they had kept that scene, and I haven't seen it, but the way you describe it's like, man, that would be great if they had that in there, because that's something that they don't really play with in this show, and it's something that I think would be a lot of fun actually to play with.
Well, it's interesting, and I thought they would be doing more with it, actually in season 2 than what we got, because they have towards the end of this season, which we'll be getting into, towards the end of this season when we have the under 18 All Valley Karate tournament. We do see there's other dojos represented, and there's one kid in particular who seems to be, kind of like, I think the character's name was Fidel in the original movie, someone else who actually makes it to like the semifinals, who's actually pretty talented and a pretty good martial artist. And so I was kind of surprised. I thought they might try and do a little bit more with that, because since it's a 10-part show, you could kind of build that character up a little bit more and then lead into like a tournament. But then again, season 2 doesn't go where I thought it was going to go at all anyway. So, but we'll get there eventually. But I just wanted to highlight that little deleted scene, because that deleted scene is kind of fun, because I had been curious, how they were going to address MMA and, kind of the emergence of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Because every martial arts, well, it seems like every generation, every 10 years, whatever, a new martial art emerges that's sort of like the martial art du jour, like that everybody's into.
Yeah.
When I was saying martial arts, Aikido, primarily through Steven Seagal, was like the big thing when I was primarily training. And I studied in Aikido and Aikido Jiu-Jitsu for many, many years. And I found myself loving the martial art just for the martial art itself. It wasn't specifically because it was Steven Seagal had done. It's so funny because a friend of mine wanted me to go to classes with him because he didn't want to go by himself. And so I actually went to the classes, and I'd studied karate a little bit before then. And I went in there to check it out. And I just liked it. I thought it was really interesting, but I hadn't actually seen a lot of like Steven Seagal movies. I wasn't even sure who he was talking about. I just went because my friend wanted to go. So it's so funny because I fell in love with Aikido and then eventually started watching Seagal's movies, and then eventually found myself slightly horrified at the brutality of what he was doing in relation to what Aikido actually is. So it's interesting, that kind of perspective, because that was like the big thing. And then obviously in the 80s, karate was the big thing because of Karate Kid. Like, it seems like every so many years there's a new thing, which obviously Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu emerged with the emergence of, Ultimate Fighting. And then obviously now with MMA, I think MMA is probably the martial art du jour kind of idea at the moment. We had, fitness kickboxing with Taibo. Like, it's interesting how, every so many years something emerges. So I was curious if they were going to address that. So the thing about this deleted scene is it does actually address that.
Right.
So I did think it was a bit of a unfortunate omission, because I think it's something they should talk about in the show. So
yeah, I agree with you. I think that, even like I said, I haven't seen the scene, but just the way you're describing it, I wish they'd had more of that, because that is one thing that's lacking in the show a little bit.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Bobby Chambers has a comment, and he actually says, he's like, that was my first thought when I saw this show. Will it become karate versus MMA? And that's a good point to bring up. I thought season 2 was going to lean into that a little bit more, or at least address it. So, but boy, they went in a completely different direction.
And it is a little bit of a missed opportunity. I think both of us really like Cobra Kai, but I think that if there's one criticism I'm going to give, it's exactly that, because I kind of thought that too, Bobby, because at first, in the first episode, when Miguel is talking to Johnny and he asks Johnny what he was doing, he immediately starts talking about Taekwondo and I think Jiu-Jitsu. And karate is not even on his mind, because he's supposed to represent sort of today's, teenager and their perceptions of the martial arts and things like that. And so I thought it was kind of like they were going to go somewhere with that. And then later on, we find out that the bully is a wrestler, which I also thought was really interesting. And they could have done a lot more with that. I wrestled all 4 years in high school, and they really could have done more with that. And that could also get into that whole, MMA versus old school karate and all those debates. And I think that's the biggest missed opportunity, much more in season 2. I think that season 2, that would have been an obvious way to go. And I wish they had gone that direction, but they didn't. Minor spoiler alert there. But, that is one, that's probably the one big missed opportunity I think that they have in Cobra Kai. But in season 1, they're still trying to get things established, and I think they do a good job of doing that.
And there's this old adage too that used to get thrown around the dojo I used to train in, and it's that you never box a boxer, you never kickbox a kickboxer, you never wrestle a wrestler. And the basic idea of that tenet or that idea is that you always come at someone with something opposite of what they normally do, because that's gives you, at least in your own mind, you're playing to your strengths, and then you're leveraging what you may perceive in your mind as an advantage. Because because we did some ground fighting when I used to train, and I just hated ground fighting because I hate rolling around on the ground. So I totally agree with Johnny and his observation. Why do you want to roll around on the ground? I was never a big fan of that. And so that was usually my main thing, is when I knew I was squaring off with someone who was primarily a grappler, I tried to take them apart as fast as I could, because I didn't want to have to roll around on the ground.
We did do grappling in my karate school. I did Shuri-Ryu style karate, and we did do grappling. We always did it on our knees. They wouldn't let us grapple from our feet, but we did do grappling at the karate school that I went to. So,
jiu-jitsu was a component of my training. We were required to do the 4 quadrants, so we had to learn how to ground fight. And there is a lot of stuff that happens with Aikido that actually does happen on the knees. That there's a whole part of it that obviously comes from ancient, Japan. Stuff that the samurai had to be able to do. So we learned how to do all that, but we did an awful lot of ground fighting too, and I just completely hated it. I'll be honest, I hated it. So whenever I was basically when we would do randori, and I was kind of sparring or with someone that I knew liked to ground fight, I would just kick their legs out from under them as fast as I could, because I didn't want to give them a chance. So, so with that, we're going to move into episode 4. Top episode 4 was Cobra Kai Never Dies. Read the synopsis here real quick. It just says, Daniel's defaced billboard causes tension with Johnny. Johnny's son Robbie is embarrassed by his father and his new dojo. The bullying against Miguel escalates, and Johnny finds himself motivated in a surprising way. So this is one of those episodes I felt like it was a bit of a turning point for me, specifically with Johnny. I think the big thing that I took away from this episode, and if I remember correctly, I think this is the episode where the bullies jumped Miguel. Actually, I think it was in the library or whatever it was. Was it library or where was it?
No, it was actually at the end of the party. He got jumped in the
end of the party.
Yeah, in the locker room.
That's right.
Because Johnny happened to be there putting the flyers out. And of course, Daniel was there trying to keep an eye out on Sam, and so he starts harassing Johnny for putting the flyers up and things like that, And then eventually, he gets jumped in the. Of course, he actually kind of fights back, and that kind of gets him into more trouble because he still hasn't really learned enough to really do that. He's just kind of doing it. He's just kind of going by instinct, and he gets his ass kicked pretty bad.
and Johnny actually is the one that finds him, and I found that
and takes him home.
I found it to be a pretty powerful moment. It reminded me of the moment where Miyagi finds Daniel after they jump him at the end of the dance.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that was I just found it to be a surprising moment with Johnny. Him being sort of like, taken care of. It was very interesting. It's a side of him. I knew it was part of him because you could kind of see it in him that he is a fully rounded human being. He's not a monster, that we believe he was, obviously. But I was surprised at that. I was genuinely surprised that that was kind of that compassionate moment. And the whole time we were getting ready to do this, like, I know I'm going to goof that up and say it's part of the wrong episode. But I did really, really like that moment that was the end of the last episode. So in this one, obviously I guess, I don't know. Anyhow, Johnny, if I remember correctly, Johnny gets drunk and basically defaces the billboard with obviously a very inappropriate thing. This show has a warning graphic on the front of it, so we can talk about it, I guess, if we want. But anyhow, he defaces the billboard, and this sets off sort of like again another chain of events that is pushing Daniel further and further to where he feels like he I don't know. It's interesting how Daniel continues to kind of lose control. Definitely in season 1 more than season 2, I felt like, but and gets kind of allows himself to constantly get more and more riled up about what's happening. So yeah, I guess that this episode, I guess the big thing was just it was kind of shocking what Johnny did. I mean, I'm not shocked that he did it. Still kind of shocked that he did what he did. So I guess that'd be my big moment from this particular episode. What about you, Eric? What did you have as your kind of interesting moment or something you definitely liked from this particular episode?
Well, they definitely, I think they kind of amp up the humor in that episode. Obviously the whole thing with the billboard is pretty funny, and Daniel's reaction to it. And at first they kind of take a different direction for a little bit of that, where they kind of start to show the rivalry that Daniel has with one of the other car dealers, which I thought was interesting. So they kind of have like a little red herring going, which again, that's just good writing. You know what I mean? That's good writing where they do something like that. So Daniel doesn't like immediately think that Johnny did it and all that kind of stuff. It takes him a while to get there and realize what's going on. So I think they did a good job with that, especially with the boa, the boba tea and stuff like that, which was quite popular at the time. Just funny, I think it's already something that's kind of gone away a little bit, the boba tea. But I remember a lot of places had boba tea at the time, the big straws and all that stuff. So anyway, they did amp up the humor quite a bit in that episode, I thought.
And that was like a big moment they used a lot was. Daniel doing that kick and knocking that out of that guy's hand.
Right. Yeah, to show that he is a real karate guy. He is not just doing that for just for promotion.
Right. Sorry about that. I had a bit of a coughing fit. So that was that like all these episodes. That was a fun episode, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And do you have anything else for that one, or should we go ahead and move to the next one?
Oh, we can move on. Counterbalance.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, Counterbalance is the next episode. That's episode 5. I'll read the synopsis here real quick. It says that Daniel uses underhanded tactics to try to drive Johnny out of business. When Miguel defends Samantha's honor at school with his new karate skills, the resulting viral video drives a new wave of enrollment at the Cobra Kai dojo. So this is a really fun episode. I think the big moment they want us to kind of take away from this one is definitely Miguel's fight in the school lunchroom. And they definitely did a fun choreography with that. That, of course, is the video that goes viral. And as the synopsis says, it helps to encourage more people to actually check out Cobra Kai and what he's learning, because he's able to actually take it to the bullies and look really strong and powerful in that moment, which is very good for him. And it's a fun moment. But I think for me, the big takeaway is kind of the shocking thing that happens with Daniel, because he does actually go to, if I remember correctly, doesn't he go to the landlord who owns the building, and he's trying to find a way to basically force the landlord or buy Johnny out of his space in the strip mall and basically get Cobra Kai closed down, try and leverage his business muscle in order to essentially put Johnny out of business. And that for me is the big takeaway from this episode, because that's one of the moments where we see that Daniel is in my mind anyway, maybe taking this a little too far, and you can tell that he, in his own way, even though he seems like he's well adjusted and he's found balance and he's got a good life and these things aren't affecting him, you can still see that he's holding on to that stuff in a very death grip kind of manner, much more deeply than I think I even realized. I mean, they kind of show you that through all these different episodes, but this was the one that when he pulls this kind of thing, I was like, wow, that's kind of a BS way to go about it, so I found that a little bit shocking. What about you? Eric?
Yeah, definitely. Daniel takes a real turn in this and really does sort of take on a little bit of like a villainous role at this point, because what he does is very underhanded and not, you know, it's not the kind of thing you would think Daniel LaRusso would do, that the Karate Kid would do. You just would think that he'd be above that kind of stuff, because what he does is very underhanded and totally uses his position to his advantage. And the fact that Johnny doesn't have the kind of power that he has, the kind of pull that he has, and Daniel really tries to use that against him. But actually, the thing that I took more from that, and I thought that the sort of breakout moment for me, was all about Aisha. And the fact that you get to see the development of her character quite a bit in this episode, and Johnny gets his second student. And I really thought that was a really neat moment. And, you know, kind of going back to the angle on Samantha, it kind of shows you some of the real problems that she's created in terms of the way that she's alienated her best friend. And again, I go back to the fact that I don't like Daniel's wife, because she kind of encourages this and dismisses this as just, oh, well, she just wants to be popular. That's okay. That's fine. No, it's not fine. It's not fine at all. It's not cool to leave your friends behind and treat them like crap and garbage just because you're suddenly more popular. It's not the way it works, even in high school. Not if you have any kind of a morality, you know. So, and you know, the fact is, you know, previously, you know, that was back at the Halloween party, they had really gone after Aisha, and they did the thing where she was alone at the table, at the party table, at the food table, and she was just eating. And they decided to make fun of her, and you know, they basically recorded her and then put this little oink oink, you know, thing all over the school, and basically destroyed her social life, you know, and completely ostracized her. And Sam allowed that, didn't do a damn thing about it. You know, the fact that they were just totally being cruel to her. And the only place she has to turn is to Cobra Kai. Once again, Johnny is the only person that will help her. And what's interesting with her is her situation's a little different, because she is a rich girl. She's just not one of the quote unquote pretty rich girls. You know what I mean? But she actually is a rich girl. She actually, like, I think they say her dad is like a former football player or something like that, which is kind of interesting. But ultimately, the only person that she has to go to, once again, is Johnny. Johnny's the only one that's willing to help her. And I love how Johnny tries to give her that confidence. You know, I love that moment where he's just like, you know, when you have the moment, you're going to strike back. You know what I mean? And that to me is like the real big moment where it's like, all right, now this is going somewhere now. You know, like this guy really is starting to really take charge and really do something, you know? So I love that, where he's building her up, because she's been so beaten down. People are trying to tell her to kill herself. Very topical to the way things are today with bullying and cyberbullying. And he's telling her, you know what, you're going to kick these girls' asses. You know what I mean? Like, and I like that. I like that kind of empowerment. It's very non-PC, you know what I mean? But it's just, that's sometimes what I think a person needs. You know, that's all they've got. So I really, to me, that was the breakout point of that episode for me.
Very cool. Very cool. So if that's good, I think we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. I was thinking we kind of move kind of quick. That way we can cover the whole first season.
Yeah.
So the next episode is called Quiver. I'll read the synopsis here just real quick. It says that Johnny's dojo attracts a group of misfits while his son Robbie, who harbors ulterior motives, lands a new job. Samantha makes a new friend in science class, and Daniel inspires interest in karate from an unlikely person. So I think this episode, to me, I just love seeing. And as the show moves on, the thing that becomes pretty apparent, and you've already brought this up, Eric, is how Johnny ends up being sort of the mentor, the teacher for basically all of the kids that are basically being bullied at the school.
Right.
And how his teaching and him, you know, kind of giving them the tools of karate and essentially in a manner, obviously to an extent, the same things that he learned from Kreese, how it gives them a newfound power, and that's how it's helping to build all of these kids up. Because as we get a few episodes in, we get some interesting episodes where we see them kind of together as a class, and it's like an entire class of Daniels. Like he's basically teaching, you know, people that under normal circumstances when he was in high school that he would have been torturing.
Right.
And it's interesting to see, again, you mentioned that before, the flip of the script. You know, and how and it's interesting too, also because I thought it was really kind of cool because they could have taken the whole Daniel Miyagi thing, and it could have been Johnny just primarily teaching that one student, and then you could have shown him teaching the class in the background and not spending a lot of time with that. But I thought it was interesting because it is Cobra Kai. It's the group, because that was part of the strength of Cobra Kai is that normally when Johnny has issues or he's confronting Daniel or whatever, if you ever notice in the original film, he's never alone. He's always got his compatriots there with him. He's got his fellow brothers in Cobra Kai, and it's fun to see that idea being carried forward in a different way. But this is a really, really fun episode, and I. Of course, we do see obviously in this one that Robbie gets the job at the LaRusso Auto, and I'm going to be honest with you. Robbie's one of those characters I don't like that much. So you're not going to hear me talk too much about Robbie. I don't know what it's about Robbie. Robbie rubs me the wrong way. And it kind of affects how I see Daniel at times. But anyhow, that was my big takeaway is I just enjoyed seeing Johnny interacting with so many of the kids and beginning to realize it's like, wow, at this point in the show, it's like he's going to be teaching basically sort of who the kids that would essentially be the Daniels and any other TV movie or other Karate Kid series. Like this could have been Miyagi teaching all these kids, and it's interesting to see him in that role. So that was kind of my big takeaway from this particular episode. What about you, Eric?
Well, the thing that I really like, and it dovetails on what you're talking about, is how you do have this big group of misfits that absolutely these are the type of guys that Johnny would have picked on when he was in high school. And he does. He stays true to form. He picks on Eli immediately. And we see the genesis of one of my favorite characters in Cobra Kai, which is Hawk, and the beginning of the transformation of Eli into Hawk. And Johnny's not nice to him. Johnny goes right after him and goes right after the thing that everybody goes after, his lip. What's up with your screwed up lip, man? You know what I mean? And just tears into him. The kid's all like, can you just not talk about that? Can you tell us something? He's like, well, what else am I going to talk about, man? I mean, it's right there. And it's kind of like Johnny's kind of doing that obvious thing of, kid, you're going to have to deal with that somehow. You know what I mean? Because that's what everybody sees the second they look at you. They see that lip. That's what they see. And that's what you've become. And so it's a really interesting moment. Again, it's completely not PC. It's not what the counselors would say for you to do or anything like that. But Johnny stays true to form, and he ends up helping this guy. Now, as things go by, you might say, well, did he really help him? But at least initially he does, because you see the beginning of a huge transformation with that character. And I think he starts to steal the show.
Yeah, Hawk is an interesting character. He definitely is. I'm going to single him out probably here in just a couple more episodes, but he's one of those characters that it was fun to see his transformation and how he emerges and kind of finds his own kind of identity. And it's interesting too, because he kind of at times kind of reminds me of Dutch, I think, actually from the original, Karate Kid. Dutch was the kid who looked kind of like the David Bowie. He was the really super intense one at times. Sometimes overly too intense at times. But it was fun to see. And again, as it moves on, it's interesting to see how his character emerges. And he's got some really fun scenes coming up, actually, as we continue to work our way through the show. But no, yeah, that's a good thing to call out, Eric. That's a really good thing to call out. Let's see here. Let's go ahead, maybe, unless you have anything else you want to point out, we could go ahead and maybe move on to the next episode. And then, of course, I lost my thing here I had up that I was using as my cheat sheet.
All Valley. All Valley is the next episode after that.
All right, well, there you go. All right, so the synopsis, just real quickly, is when Johnny learns Cobra Kai is banned from the All Valley tournament, he faces the city council. Miguel asks Samantha out. Robbie takes lessons from Daniel. Just as his buddies plot a heist from LaRusso Auto. So I think for me, the big moment in this episode is obviously when Johnny has his moment and he does have to defend himself. Like that's the big moment. You continue to see Daniel kind of like pushing against him, sometimes in a very, I would think, uncharacteristic manner for what we would think for him. Like you would think that he would be more balanced and he'd have a better view of the world than he really has. But that's that impassioned speech that Johnny kind of makes in front of the council and kind of really pleads his case for why Cobra Kai should be allowed to compete is a really big moment in this one. And then the celebratory thing that happens afterwards. Obviously, the date that Miguel and Samantha have is a big moment too, because they actually kind of share in that reverie in that moment. And that's a fun, really moment too, because you get to see them both super happy and excited that they've, and you see how far they've come, in a relatively short time. You see how far Johnny's come, you see how far Miguel has come, and
they're good for each other. I mean, it's very
exactly
obvious Miguel and Johnny are good for each other. That comes through very clearly in that episode.
So that's my big moment, is going to be Johnny defending himself, basically, in front of the council, and his impassioned plea for why Cobra Kai should be allowed, to compete. And of course, this is also the episode I think we get the big drop where he says or believes that Kreese was dead. I don't think until that moment that we really know too much about what happened to Kreese. We know that he's missing. But this is the big kind of moment where we go, oh, okay, well, I guess Kreese is supposed to be dead. So that's an interesting sort of thing that's revealed in this episode too. So tell me, Eric, what were your big takeaways, or what was your big moment from this episode?
Well, Amanda San has a great point, and he mentions, how the show dives into the whole issue of mentorship and role models. Is a bad kid really bad? Is a good kid really good? Or is it all the result of a bad, good mentorship? And that's a great point, Mana Sam. And actually, in this particular episode, you see that kind of developing, and it's happening with two different students and two different teachers, where they're both sort of taking on that mentorship role, and both of these kids have different problems. I would say Robbie, kind of like Dave was mentioning, I have some problems with that character myself. You know what I mean? Because this is a kid, but that's on the one hand, he's kind of grown up without a father. His mother's kind of a bimbo, basically, and that's tough for him. But he's really fallen in with a really bad crowd where he's literally a thief. He's stealing things and stuff like that, and therefore, for me, he's not very sympathetic. I think that's one of the problems I have is right off the bat, I just don't feel a lot of sympathy for somebody like that, and there's a point where I stop feeling sorry for you, I guess, is what happens with me. Whereas I really do feel sorry for Miguel. I don't think Miguel has done anything to cause the kind of the way he's being treated. And that goes for Aisha too. I don't think Aisha has done anything to warrant the way that she is treated by other people. So to see Johnny being the only person that's actually sticking up for these folks and doing something about it. And I think, like I said, I talked about it earlier with Eli, who becomes Hawk. It's like, even with him, Johnny's not nice to him, but at the same time, he's kind of giving him something that nobody else is willing or able to give him, which is I think a lot of it has to do with pride, making these people feel proud of themselves, that they can actually, look other people in the eye and actually go toe to toe with them. There's something there that I really, really like. And I like what you're talking about, Mana Sam, because it does get down to that. Is like, it is a lot of what happens dealing with the fact of who is it's teaching you, right? Is it the student or is it the teacher that ultimately is at fault? I would say ultimately both sides have something to say when it comes to that. I think that that's part of it as well. You can't just say one or the other. We ultimately are all responsible for our own choices, but you can definitely see that. And in this episode, that's what's happening is you're seeing these two different mentors, these two different role models trying to get their students where they feel they need to go, and also seeing what problems that they're facing and whether they can overcome them or not.
Very cool. That is a good observation. And it is obviously a big tenet and a big theme of the show as a whole, for sure. It's definitely re-examining a lot of the things that we sort of assume or take for granted in the original Karate Kid film. And then I feel like I've skipped over it. I know one of these episodes kind of gives us an interesting look actually into Johnny's home life, and I can't remember which episode that is, where we actually see
That was Quiver, where we see.
Is that Quiver?
That's where he first goes to Cobra Kai as a little boy on his bike.
Yeah. And we get a sense of like we get a little bit more of filling in of the stepfather relationship, that he had. And then, we see a little bit more of his mom and how she was different. And I think too, because we know that his mom has passed and been gone quite some time when the show actually opens, I think you could see too that with the passing of his mom, you could tell that affected him as well. I mean, even though they don't spend a lot of time on it necessarily in the show, you could see how as these different pieces, when we find Johnny at the beginning of the show, you can see how as all of these different pieces are kind of removed from his life, how it's kind of like a series of dominoes. Losing the All Valley wasn't maybe necessarily the totality of it, but it was maybe the thing that began to trigger these series of events that led him to where he was. It's interesting. It's very interesting how they decided to put this whole show together, because I remember watching it as we're continuing to work through the episodes. When I originally watched them, I remember being surprised and shocked at how well put together it is, and what an interesting examination it is of these two characters. But at the same point too, how interesting it is to see how their impact as they're beginning to teach and work with these other students that they've taken on, how that affects their lives and where we find them at. It's interesting. Because in a sense, Robbie's kind of in a place, kind of the same kind of sort of place where Johnny is, at the beginning. But it's interesting because I don't find Robbie, I sympathize with Robbie and I feel bad for him, but I don't know what it is about Robbie. I don't like him. There's and it's like, if I remember correctly, I think this is the one where Daniel's walking him through the Miyagi teaching method, and we get the montage. And that's kind of fun and everything. But I did feel like at times it felt like that it was just kind of happening a little too easy, going a little too quick. Because we see the amount of time that Johnny is actually spending teaching Miguel. And I felt like that felt a little... That's the one part of all these episodes that felt a little convenient, was how quickly Daniel kind of caught Robbie up. Because he caught him up awful quick. So that was kind of my one thing where I was like... Okay, I mean, I know that Miyagi did that with Daniel, but because we spent more time with them, it felt a little bit more earned,
right,
than Robbie's training does. Because it just feels like we got to get him trained. Let's do Matrix style, download it into his head as quick as you can. It's just, I was like, okay, all right, not the same, but it I don't know. And then Bobby has an interesting observation. He says that Miyagi trained so he wouldn't have to fight. Although Johnny is teaching these kids to have confidence, he's also teaching them to go on the offense, which is interesting because I think, in a sense, Bobby, that's what a lot of these kids needed. They need to know it's okay sometimes to stand up for yourself. But at the same point, as we all know too, you have to be prepared to back that up with something too. The world is just, it's just not a very pleasant place, and you have to be prepared to back it up. But you also too have to believe in yourself enough to make a stand. That's a very important thing. And that's something that Johnny gives all these kids, and it's powerful and it's inspiring. I'll be honest with you. It's interesting to me how much Cobra Kai I find inspiring in a different way, but in some ways the same as the original Karate Kid. And I never would have imagined in a million years I'd feel inspired to get back into martial arts training because of Johnny Lawrence,
right.
The bad guy from, Karate Kid. And it's interesting. Bobby goes on further to say, it's hard to say which is right, which is true. It's true. But I think that's the thing that's interesting about. Well, let me give you my perspective real quick. One of the most important things that we used to talk about a lot of times in the dojo where I trained was the yin and the yang. When you see the yin and the yang, it's of course, it's the kind of the dark teardrop and the white teardrop, and together they create a circle or a hole, and you can't have one without the other. And I know Eric has heard my crazy theory because I went on and on and on about this one night before we actually started talking about, reviewing the show. But I think that, in my mind anyway, the truism of life is that it is about balance. And it's funny because as much as Daniel talks about balance in this show, sometimes I don't think he really understands what balance is. Because the balance should exist between Johnny and Daniel. Because even though they use different methods, they're all trying to arrive at the same place and to find peace and to find whole. And I feel like that somewhere between Daniel and what he was taught and Johnny and what he was taught, there's truth. But it's somewhere between the two of them. And that's why sometimes it seems like one is right and sometimes the other is right. It's because at the end of the day, you have to have a little bit of both in order to find true balance or find true harmony. And I've always, whenever I think of the yin and the yang, and I've been thinking about it a lot because of this show, because of the difference between these two men. But at the same point too, I feel like that between the two of them, and we can't speculate about season 3 because we're not there yet. But anyhow, I'll save the rest of that for later. But it's a good thing that you bring up Bobby, for sure. And here's James Stone. Good to see you, James. James says, is it because Robbie looks like Jonathan Brandis? I never trusted that guy. I'm not sure. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about Robbie that bothers me. I think it's because we're supposed to root for him is why I don't want to root for him. They give him a particular home life where we should want to root for him, and I almost feel like that's why I don't want to root for him. It feels like he's set up to root for. He's the only really contrived character sometimes I feel like in the show. Like I'm supposed to feel something for him when I really don't. What do you think, Eric? You said that you had some issues with
I'm just
Robbie.
going to speak up for Jonathan Brandis because I think he got a raw deal. If anybody knows his story or anything like that, it's kind of tragic. But he's also in one of the most underrated films, in my opinion, which is called Sidekicks with Chuck Norris. That film has been buried. And I always really enjoyed that film. And in a lot of ways, it is a total Karate Kid ripoff. But it's a good Karate Kid ripoff. So I just want to step up and defend Jonathan Brandis a little bit because that is a highly underrated film, in my personal opinion. And, what happened to his career is kind of tragic. So
interesting. Now I know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there you go. Because I was kind of slightly lost. I'll be honest. I was like, but now that you say that, it's like, oh, okay. I get it. Now I know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think I preferred the Sidekicks TV show with Gil Gerard and Ernie Reyes.
Also classic. Also hard to find. Classic and also hard to find. But Bobby brings up the ultimate question, which is, is Miyagi's teaching outdated? Life is very different. And, I'm not sure if life is so much different, Bobby, as it is what it is that we're promoting. We being society and our culture right now we're promoting is so different because life has always been kind of the same in terms of a lot of these things. You didn't have cyberbullying before because cyberbullying wasn't a thing that existed because people didn't have their phones and computers and all that stuff. But that type of bullying has always existed. There's always been people that have acted that way and been that way. And there's always been that argument, you hear it even in some of the old movies, fighting doesn't solve anything. Well, I would say sometimes it does. Sometimes it does. And that's the ultimate question. That's something that people have been grappling with for a long time. That's not a new thing.
Yeah, it's and it's weird because I studied a little bit of boxing, studied a little bit of karate when I was younger, and it's because I was constantly getting in. Well, not constantly. To me, I felt like constantly getting into fights in school. But I was never particularly good at fighting. Just not something I was particularly, skilled at necessarily, definitely when I was younger. And then for me, when I eventually studied Aikido, it gave me a way to kind of order my life. Like actually the teaching the discipline, the point of focus, the idea of finding the art in every little thing. I don't know how else to describe that, but there is an art in every little thing that you do, and to find kind of that in so many different things helped me to find a way to better learn and appreciate certain things that sometimes I don't like to do or I don't want to do. So, but that idea, the idea of Zen, those kind of things are things that I was exposed to because of Karate Kid. I don't think that necessarily Karate Kid taught me those things, but I had a better sense of what they were, so that when I was exposed to them later on, I had a better sense. Because that's what Miyagi's trying to teach Daniel when he does all the stuff with the bonsai trees in the original Karate Kid. He's trying to teach him about Zen and finding the art in every little thing. Find a way to master your life by mastering every little thing. When I was in the Boy Scouts, our Scoutmaster Chuck Henry used to always tell us that when you're trying to achieve a goal, it's better to think of it as small baby steps and approach it that way, instead of trying to just go, oh, we're never going to get there, because there's so many things we have to do. But progress in life is always about moving forward. And sometimes moving forward is a small step. It's not a big step. And then I feel like that same idea, the idea of mastering every little thing, or trying to master every little thing in your life and find peace in doing those different tasks that sometimes are not pleasant, that there's something really powerful and important there. So in that sense, I would say I don't think Miyagi's teachings are outdated at all. I think Miyagi's teachings, in a sense, are more important than ever before. Are you talking about the wax on and the wax off and the paint the fence thing? Well, that's a fun stunt for a movie. It's an interesting way to move the story forward in Cobra Kai. But for me personally, I don't feel like that's the truism of what Miyagi was trying to teach. And I think in some ways, as we go through Cobra Kai, I think that's kind of the failing of how sometimes Daniel didn't completely understand what Miyagi was trying to teach him. That's what I was talking about earlier, about sometimes I don't feel like that Daniel really ever truly found balance. I think that Miyagi gave him the tools to find balance, but I don't know if Daniel ever truly found balance. I think he found a way to cope, but I don't know if he truly found balance. That's the thing I'm taking from Daniel, especially as we work through the first season of Cobra Kai. I mean, what do you think, Eric? Do you think I'm way off balance there myself in an observation, or?
I think the way things are portrayed, Daniel was kind of plugging along fine, and then once Johnny comes back, that kind of throws him out of whack. So it's not like nobody's perfect, but he's pretty darn close. You know what I mean? Like he's rocking and rolling. He's doing very, very well for himself. His son's kind of an idiot, but otherwise, he's doing pretty good. So I think at least the way in the show it's portrayed is that Daniel is really just thrown off by Johnny and Cobra Kai, and that kind of brings all this stuff back from his childhood, from when he was in high school, as happens with people, and that kind of throws him for a loop. And he kind of might be in a little bit more of a vulnerable position at that point because of things going on with his family and all that kind of thing. So it just kind of makes him kind of ripe for having that kind of moment, that kind of like you're talking about, that loss of balance, because everything I think was going right for him as far as he was concerned. There's that scene that I was talking about earlier when he actually sees the Cobra Kai dojo, and they just show it's like his life is perfect, like everything is fine, like he is just couldn't be happier, and it's just that moment that kind of draws him in. And I guess that does say that he maybe never fully dealt with all of that stuff, that he never fully processed that, because it's still there on the surface, and you can tell comes back in a very ugly way. We talked about earlier the underhanded things he ends up doing to Johnny, where he gets his rent hiked up, and even his wife mentions, like, didn't you think about maybe like the other people in that strip mall? You just screwed all of them too. You know what I mean? Because you got all their rents hiked up, It's like, were you even thinking about that? So There's probably something there, but I do think that for the most part, at least the way that it's portrayed in the show, that Daniel was doing fine, and then it's just this whole circumstance that kind of throws him for a loop, kind of makes him go out of whack a little bit.
Well, I'll stick to my belief. I think that Daniel is lost in success. It's kind of a weird idea, but as we continue to move forward, I don't feel like I feel like that they show us something about Daniel that's maybe not the truest view really of his life. I mean, from a storytelling standpoint, it makes sense, but I feel like as we continue to move through the show, I feel like I feel like Daniel was lost too, in a weird way.
Yeah, I think Man of Santa agrees with you. He says, in the beginning, we see that Johnny has lost his way in life. And while it's not obvious at first, we later see that Daniel has also lost his way, perhaps following Miyagi's death. And I think that's a good point right there, Man of Sand, is that we kind of see that maybe Daniel has never really fully been able to digest that. He's never been able to truly kind of accept Miyagi's death. I think there's something there that definitely that has affected him in ways that he doesn't even quite understand and sort of start to come to the forefront in the show.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is I just get the feeling sometimes that with Daniel, I don't know, and I don't know if everyone's ever really truly able to properly apply the lessons of Zen, and unless you go off to a monastery and pledge yourself to the discipline, But the point being is that I don't sometimes feel like as we make our way, specifically season 1, and even some, if not sometimes more so season 2, I just don't know if Daniel ever really truly understood exactly what Miyagi was trying to, because I feel like that in his own sense too, when you look at Miyagi's life, I feel like Miyagi was trying to set Daniel up so that he could be in a better place than he was as well. But we'll get into that when we get into season 2. There's a lot of interesting sort of like deep introspective things I think that they're doing with Daniel. And I feel like sometimes that we're not able to spend as much time on those ideas as we should, because he's got to train Robbie. I think that's why I don't like Robbie. I feel like it feels like I'm taking time away from something interesting I think that could be going on with Daniel. But it's weird too, because specifically, well, again, we'll get into that. We get into season 2 because I'm starting to get ahead of myself. Do we feel like we're pretty good with that episode, and good to move on to the next one?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so let's see here. Wow, we spent a lot of time on that one. So I think actually we're at 8, which is bolting. And I'll read the synopsis here real quick. It says, helping his students prepare for the tournament inspires Johnny to clean up his own act. Daniel's cousin vandalizes Johnny's car, leading to a confrontation between Johnny and Daniel at the LaRusso residence. So this is an interesting episode. And it's kind of the one that really kind of heightens the tensions. I think the big moment for me is going to be when they try to torch Johnny's car. That is the big moment, and the confrontation that happens. And then of course Johnny takes off on the motorcycle. That for me I think is the big moment, the big takeaway from this, because you can tell at that point that obviously whatever's going on between Johnny and Daniel is going to come to a head, and Johnny's just going to come straight at Daniel now. Like there's no ifs, ands, or ways about it. That's going to be the big takeaway from this particular episode for me. What about you, Eric?
No, that's it. I mean, I think that's it. I mean, that's absolutely it. That's the big thing that starts to progress the story forward at that point. You're really starting to see things much more from the Johnny perspective, as far as, the way this guy's being treated, and that he is sort of he's the one who's really getting the raw deal out of all this. So it definitely escalates things and takes them to a different level. I mean, they burned the guy's car, so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty dramatic moment too.
Yeah.
And it can, and even though Daniel isn't directly involved, it kind of shows you how this is kind of all getting out of hand, you
No, I
know.
mean he's created the circumstances, I think, and Johnny's
Yeah,
not without fault. I mean, he did the
true.
billboard thing, and that escalated things as well. But it's one thing to vandalize a billboard; it's another thing to torch somebody's car. So
Right, right, for sure, for sure. So I think we're at 120. Let's go ahead and try and get through the rest of these if that's okay here, just kind of hitting the high points. So episode 9 is different from the same. The synopsis says Louis' reckless actions forces Johnny and Daniel to go down memory lane. The Cobra Kai students plot revenge against the popular kids, and Miguel grows impatient with Samantha. So the big takeaway from this episode for me is obviously going to be the confrontation initially that looks like it's going to happen actually between Daniel and Johnny. This leads to a pretty comedic moment. This is one of the moments where I thought Daniel's wife was actually pretty entertaining because I like where the two of them look like they're about ready to square off, and she kind of throws out her little thing about, as much as I'd love to watch the two of you settle this, I don't want to get blood on the patio. That's a really kind of fun moment. And then the big takeaway for me too, in conjunction with that, is how we see how they're not as dissimilar from each other as they think they are. We get a similar kind of episode like this in season 2 as well, where we see that they have maybe more in common than they realize, and that if they could find a way to bury the past, then maybe that they could actually be friends. And this is it's an interesting episode because you feel like maybe they can move past what's going on. And this is also a big episode too, because this is where Johnny just kind of offhandedly throws out whatever happened to Allie, and then Daniel actually gives us some information about Allie because he's still in contact with her, and so that's kind of a big seminal moment too. What about you, Eric? What were your kind of big moments or big moment from this episode?
no, I think it's a good theme that you see a lot, and it can be overused, but I think they did it well in this episode, which is just that general idea that a lot of times rivals, enemies, even in a different life, they would have been friends. That's really what it comes down to. You see that theme a lot. You see it actually a lot in superhero type stuff, which I really like. It's kind of like if anybody's ever seen Unbroken, I love that kind of speech that Samuel L. Jackson's character has at the end when he kind of reveals what's going on, and that idea that even though one's the villain and the other's the hero, that they could be friends. You know what I mean? Or they should have been friends. That kind of a thing. It's an old theme that's used a lot, but I think it's used well in this particular episode. And I think it rings true. I think it rings true that a lot of times people that are rivals, people that don't get along, it has a lot more to do with circumstance than it does necessarily with the fact that they're, quote unquote, so different that this was just bound to happen. Because a lot of times it's just not true. A lot of times it is circumstance. And we all know a girl or a significant other will cause these kind of rifts more than anything. And that's ultimately why Daniel and Johnny didn't get along. They were fighting over a girl. Happens all the time.
Yes, it's it's kind of a tale as old as time at times.
Right.
It seems like, and it's definitely one that we've. I think at some point everyone's kind of lived through that sort of thing. I think that's kind of like a rite of passage at one point or another. And it's something that some people never really, just kind of like these two, they never really move past. I think that's even reflected too. And I'm curious to see how they're going to do this, because I do feel like that a lot of this is actually reflected, obviously, in what happened between Sato and Miyagi. That they kind of give what little they give us about what happened between the two of them, that becomes sort of like the underpinnings of Karate Kid 2. And I've also hit Eric with some of my crazy theories about season 3 and what we're going to learn about what might have happened between Miyagi and Sato. That's actually, I think, reflected in what we're seeing in Cobra Kai right now. And more in relation to season 2 necessarily than season 1, but interesting. So very cool.
Yeah, Man of Sand mentions that he really enjoyed seeing the two guys reminiscing together, including about Elizabeth Shue's character Allie, which I think I've mentioned before. I know I mentioned on the last episode. I've always had a huge crush on on Allie as portrayed by Elizabeth Shue ever since the first time I saw that movie, and I was very young. So,
and it's interesting.
I got a kick out of that too.
And it's interesting too because as we've been going through Cobra Kai for the show here, of course they started season 2 of The Boys, and my wife and I are making our way through season 2 of The Boys as they're releasing the episodes. And it's interesting because Elizabeth Shue was a very important character in season 1 of The Boys, but so completely different from Allie from Karate Kid. I mean, couldn't have been more completely different. And then that story is so twisted and weird and whatever. And so it was so funny as I'm thinking back and reminiscing about Allie from Karate Kid, watching the original film, and reflecting on all that. But at the same point, you know, she's playing this completely opposite character in The Boys. And so as people are, you know, speculating about her showing up, hopefully in season 3, or if she will show up, and what that's going to entail for the show, it's been really hard for me to disconnect her from her character from The Boys. And I'm like, going, I don't know if that's a good idea because I can't separate her from that character at the moment. So
I always find that weird when people say stuff like that, because I always understand that they're actors, and the better the actor, the more diverse the kind of characters they can play. So I've always felt bad for actors that get typecast and things like that, because I'm just not like that. I mean, there are definitely actors that I associate more than anything else with a certain part. But even in this context, for instance, I'm a real fan of The Outsiders, and that's a film that Ralph Macchio was in that I think is a great film, and it's like a who's who of 80s stars, you know. And so I never really quite get that. So,
well, for me, that's what I'm saying. It's like once she actually shows up on the show as Allie and she's in character, I'm sure it'll all fall away. I'm just saying at the same moment while we're watching Cobra Kai and I'm reminiscing on her character, but at the same point, we're also making we were rewatching season 1 of The Boys in anticipation of season 2, and she's just such a, you know, quasi-evil, manipulative character that she plays. Elizabeth Shue, the actor, obviously not Allie from Karate Kid, but that character that she plays is so quasi-evil and manipulative. You know, and then when you see all these theories about, you know, well, Allie caused all of this and whatever, and you're like, it's been hard for me to, you know what I mean, kind of not interject a little bit of that into this. So anyhow, but I would love to see her come back, and I would love to see her play Allie again. So I guess at that, unless you have anything else for this particular episode, I guess we're good to go ahead and talk about the last one, which is episode 10, which is Mercy. I will read the synopsis for this real quick. It says, it is the day of the 2018 and it's important to remember, this show came out quite a few years ago compared to when we're watching it now. It is the day of the 2018 All Valley Karate Tournament, and Cobra Kai is determined to win. Robbie signs up unaffiliated, and a familiar face from the past returns. So, This is I really love this episode for a whole lot of reasons. But Eric, why don't, because I've been going kind of first for the last couple of ones, what was your big moment or takeaway from episode 10, Mercy, of Cobra Kai season 1?
Well, spoiler alert, huge spoiler alert, and I don't think this will surprise Dave at all for me to say this, but it's all about Kreese for me. It's all about that last scene. The return to Kreese is huge for me. I love the way it was done. I love how they took their time to build up to that moment. And it just floored me, it blew me away to see Kreese back. I know a lot of other stuff happened in this episode, but that's the big takeaway for me. Seeing Kreese back was huge.
I think for me, the big moment, obviously, is the return of Kreese. That is a big, huge deal, especially when you consider the last we'd heard is that he was dead. Because that's what Johnny said. Johnny said that he had died. So when he shows up at the end, it's a big, huge shock. I remember watching this originally. It was on YouTube Red, the Janimal, who used to be the co-host of the In the Studio Retrospective show, which was where this kind of thing kind of got started. We were hanging out together because my wife had been doing some traveling. I can't remember if she was in Italy or Africa. Anyhow, she was somewhere in the world, and Jan had come over to keep me company, and so we were basically creating a comic book basically in a day. I'd had this crazy idea that eventually became Dark Meat, which is about a chicken who thinks he's Batman. And so we were in the process of just, making each other laugh and kind of putting this thing kind of together. And we were binge watching Cobra Kai at the same point. Well, eventually we stopped working on this thing we're working on. We were just both watching Cobra Kai, and I think both our jaws kind of hit the floor when Kreese showed up. And then when it ends, you're like, no, you can't end there. What if there isn't a second season? Like that's the reaction. It's like that ending is so powerful. It's like, you can't do that because we have to know what happens next. So that's obviously the big, huge moment. But for me, the other big moment was seeing Miguel win the All Valley. And then secondly, on an unfortunate note, the way he wins the All Valley, it's sort of that sort of moment where it's like, it's great to see him win because you're wanting to see him succeed and you want to see him come out on top. But at the same point, at moments when he's fighting, it's interesting because it's just like Johnny. That's the thing. That was what it kind of shocked me, is how much he was like Johnny. Because Johnny had the same thing. There were some competitors that he faced off against that when he got to the end, he would bow and show them respect, and they were cool, right? But then there were other people he fought, and he was like, forget you, and would try to smear their face in the mat, for lack of a better way to describe it, And Miguel was pretty much, in some ways, almost a mirror image of how Johnny was in the original Karate Kid. And it felt weird at times because I felt like, am I rooting for the bad guy? Like, am I really seriously rooting for the bad guy? Because that's what it feels like. But at the same point, too, it was hard for me, too, because like I said, I don't like Robbie. So I wasn't exactly rooting for Robbie either. So there was a couple of times I was like, yeah, go ahead. Take him out. Take him out. Because I really kind of didn't like Robbie to begin with. So I didn't feel too bad about it. But that was a big moment for me too. The big moment for me, definitely Kreese. Second big moment was just getting to see Miguel win. And it was kind of fun seeing his mom so happy and excited for him too. We don't talk a lot about the actress that plays Miguel's mom, but she does a good job, and again, we're seeing a different version or a story of how Daniel's life could have unfolded in a different time and in a different place. Because it reflects that moment in Karate Kid, too, and it's fun to see at that moment anyway, his mom feeling like that this was a good thing, but at the same point, too, she also points out the fact a little bit later on that, hey, look, but I also saw some things that scared me, so it was interesting to see that, and it was fun to see Miguel win and come out on top. And another big moment I like too, I like the way that what they did with Hawk. They have a lot of fun with him, like kind of with the music that they do for him. And I feel like the actor that plays him, you could tell that he has studied, because he's definitely got some good moves. Right. I think he's studied previously, because there is a control and a command that he has that's a little different from some of the other actors. And he comes across as being a little bit more competent. They have a lot of fun with him visually, with the mohawk and everything. It's just fun to watch him. Like he's just a really fun character to watch. So that's I guess those are going to be the big moments for me. But obviously Kreese coming back, that's the big one. And then Man of Sin actually has a comment here where he says the return of Kreese is a jaw-dropping cliffhanger, and I also particularly like the moment where Daniel arrives at the tournament and sees an old poster of himself. That is a very great moment to call out, Man of Sin, they have these banners that they're kind of unfurling because it's the 50th anniversary of the All Valley tournament. And there is this moment where they unfurl the banner of Daniel doing the crane kick, and he kind of stands there and he's kind of looking on that and reflecting. And they have some fun little musicals. And that's the other thing about Cobra Kai 2, especially season 1. They do a really good job, and they have a lot of fun with the musical choices. The I Want It All from Queen playing in this one is really fun. And the way that they kind of set that moment up with Daniel kind of seeing that classic moment from the original Karate Kid. And then that's what I was going to call out too. They also throw that back in his face because Johnny actually teaches that move to Miguel, and Miguel actually uses that. That's actually the first thing that Miguel does. That's how the tournament starts. Is Miguel uses the crane kick to about take that kid's head off. And I was just like, oh man, that's not right. So, but it was fun though. It was fun. Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, very cool. Then Amanda has another comment where he says, seeing Johnny dismay at Miguel's win made for a dark victory or Pyrrhic moment. Yes, most definitely. Because that's the thing. He wants Miguel to win. And obviously he's trained him up. But at the same point, when he sees the lengths that Miguel will go to win, that's when he begins to see the fallacies even more so. I think that he'd realized at maybe some of the things that Kreese had taught him. He realized that they weren't always all good because he sees the impact that it's had on his life. But I don't think it really sunk in quite as much until he sees sort of the bad behaviors that he was taught being mimicked by his students out on the mat, that he realizes like, well, wait a minute, I want to bring Cobra Kai back, and I want to bring back the glory and the power, and I want to be on top again. But he's like, but wait a minute, I don't want to do it like this. I don't want to really bring back Kreese. And it's interesting that Kreese emerges basically at the end of the episode, because that's kind of what he does. You know, he passes Kreese's teachings on essentially to these kids, and then, you know, it's like say his name and he will appear. You know, Kreese just emerges at the end of the episode, you know, so it's interesting. Again, great writing, very well structured. And this episode's a lot of fun. It has a lot of fun martial arts choreography, and it's the kind of stuff I like. It's all grounded and real. There's not a lot of wire work going on in it. It's just kind of the old school, you know, karate that I grew up loving. And that's a lot of fun for me too, is just seeing that kind of stuff too. Did you feel that way too, Eric? Did you just enjoy just seeing kind of the old school fun karate where it's just real grounded?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I really do enjoy it. I think that the choreography in Cobra Kai is done very, very well. And it is kind of like very old school. And I like it. I like it because that's kind of the whole thing with being a retro rogue is, you know, you take old things and you make them new again, because it's all a cycle. That's the way entertainment works. It cycles. And that's one of the reasons that I think that this fits in so well with what we've been trying to do and being a retro rogue and all that kind of stuff, is that this is absolutely a retro show where they are taking these old things and making them new again.
And it's fun too because they carry over sort of the thing that kind of began with the original Karate Kid. Because in the original Karate Kid, Pat E. Johnson, who was the fight choreographer, I've actually been in Pat Johnson's dojo in California. Pat Johnson, he choreographed the original Karate Kid. A lot of people may not realize he actually choreographed a lot of the Mortal Kombat movie, the first one. And he's done all kinds of amazing stunt and martial arts work. But what's really kind of fun too is that they take this idea, because he actually is the referee in the original Karate Kid films. So the fight choreographer is basically the referee. Well, they did the same thing actually here in Cobra Kai. The gentleman that you see as the referee, my understanding, is actually one of the fight choreographers, or the main fight choreographer actually for Cobra Kai, which that's kind of fun that he gets to have a speaking role and be on screen. So that's really cool too.
That is cool. That's very cool. I didn't know that. That's very cool.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. I've watched all kinds of videos, learned all kinds of things, got all kinds of crazy theories. Like you go on YouTube, you search, Cobra Kai, they'll tell you everybody's the villain. That's the funny
Right.
thing. Who's the ultimate villain of Cobra Kai? Some people think it's Daniel. Some people think it's Samantha. Quite a few people think it's Kreese. It's crazy, all the outlandish theories, which we'll get into those because we're going to talk about Cobra Kai season 2, and then we can get into a lot of these crazy theories because I definitely want to hear everyone's opinion. But if you go on YouTube, which is the appropriate place to go look for it, because YouTube is where this kind of all started, go to YouTube. You can search Cobra Kai theories, and all kinds of crazy stuff will come up. If you have a moment, watch some of it. Put your crazy tinfoil hat on, kind of work your way through season 2 if you haven't done it, and then obviously come back for hopefully the next 2 episodes, and we'll delve into season 2, and we'll put our tinfoil hats on, and we'll speculate about what we think is going to happen in season 3. Because boy, I got some crazy theories, and then of course my stupid minds come up with my own, spitballing off of theirs. So it'll be interesting to see what speculate about what we think might be happening with season 3. Because that Netflix teaser for season 1 and season 2 of Cobra Kai ends with a little bit of season 3, and that's a huge thing that happens at the end of that. That's so amazing, and I'm so excited for it. And we'll have to see. Plus, also season 2 ends on such a crazy note.
Yeah,
I still don't know how I feel about what happened at the end of season 2. So cool. Awesome. Is that good for our Cobra Kai? Do you have anything else that you want to add, Eric, or anything else?
No, I think that's good for Cobra Kai. I did want to go back to some comments that were in the Rogues Gallery earlier that were a little bit off topic, but I thought it was just something that was interesting to call out because we were talking about Jonathan Brandis for a little while, and James Stone came back and said, haha. Sidekicks was bonkers fun, mentioning that Sidekicks film that I enjoyed. He said, I kid, but he said hashtag Sequest, to which Bobby Chambers said, forgot about that. We need a retro review, haha. And so we have a suggestion there from the Rogues Gallery about a possible retro review in the future, which would be Sequest, which is a show that I did watch when it first came out, but haven't watched in a really, really long time.
I thought they were suggesting Sidekicks.
Oh, I thought that. Oh, were they suggesting Sidekicks or Sequest? Okay, so we'll have to figure out which one. Or maybe they wouldn't mind. Maybe they wouldn't mind both. So
we can just do both. I don't care.
Although, like I said, Sidekicks is hard to find. I don't know if it's even available anywhere right now. It's really hard to find, and I don't know why that is. I think there's some sort of a distribution problem when it comes to that film. Sequest is available on Peacock. I know that. So that one's not hard to find at all.
Interesting. Well, will that be?
And James said both. James said both, and Bobby said agree both. Sequest and Sidekicks. Again, I don't know where Sidekicks is even available. I know. Because I did research on that years ago, and apparently there's some distribution problem with that film, which is really weird because Chuck Norris is in it. You'd think that wouldn't, just because Chuck Norris is in it, you'd think it would be out there somewhere. But
yeah, you would assume that if Chuck Norris wanted people to watch Sidekicks, they would be able to watch it.
No, it has something to do with the people who made it. I guess it was independently financed and all that kind of stuff. And there's a weird story there.
Well, I was just making the joke about all the Chuck Norris, power.
Oh, yeah.
I figured if Chuck Norris wants you to see Sidekicks, you'd see Sidekicks. I mean, I wouldn't mind talking about the pilot for, the other Sidekick show. I was talking about the one with Gil Gerard.
Yeah, that was a good show. I remember watching that show as a kid as well, and I really enjoyed it. And, of course, that one has Gil Gerard in it, Buck Rogers.
Yeah. So. I was curious to see a lot of times, I'll research it later. A lot of times you can sometimes find this stuff actually just floating around on YouTube until you highlight it and someone goes, why is that there? And then they pull it down.
Well, hey, man, you said, speaking of Roy Schneider stuff, Sequest, how about a review sometime of Blue Thunder? We have reviewed.
We have reviewed this program.
We actually have reviewed. So, but you also said, or one of those other 80s techno thrillers. But yeah, Man of Sand, we actually did do a review of Blue Thunder, and that's still available up there on the YouTube. So
I love Blue Thunder. I love that movie. I watch it 2 or 3 times a year. I love the soundtrack. I actually got the limited release version of the soundtrack that was actually released by La La Land Records a few years ago. I'm a huge fan of Blue Thunder. And surprisingly enough, on the soundtrack for Blue Thunder is actually an alternate musical cue that originally they intended to have the film end on, where at the very end of the film, it was going to be revealed. Because if you notice the tail numbering for Blue Thunder, which isn't on the tail, it's actually on the turbines. Not the turbine, but the exhaust ports. But the numbering for the helicopter is 2. Well, at the end of Blue Thunder, the way they had one time intended to end the film was actually with the reveal that there's another warehouse, and then they're rolling out the prototype for Blue Thunder, which was 1, because there was a 1 and a 2. So there's a great musical cue that ends with them rolling it out, and it's very kind of ominous when you realize that they have a second one. So what are they going to do with that? So
well, they made the Blue Thunder TV series. That's what they did with the second one.
We're not going to talk about the Blue Thunder television series. We're not going to talk about it. I never cared for the TV series, unfortunately.
I mentioned in our review, I actually know I confused things from the movie with the television show, because I think I was much more familiar with the television show than I was with the movie as a kid. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, there you go. We're going to segue over into pop culture. I'll set it up real quick. So here in our pop culture news segment, we talk about anything that's happening in the world of pop culture news that we think you, our dear valued viewer, our dear valued listener, will find interesting. It could be something that Eric finds that he thinks cool, something I find I think's cool, but it's hopefully something we think that you would enjoy discussing here in our pop culture news segment. Apologies off the top. Eric and I were going to talk about a lot of the same things, so I decided after talking with Eric, if it was okay if he just kind of leads it and I just kind of react and add to the conversation. So I think that's what we're going to do tonight. So Eric, why don't you get us kicked off with our first item in pop culture news?
Before I do get started, I just want to acknowledge another comment from the Rogues Gallery here, which is that we talked about Gil Gerard. Mana San said Gil Gerard was also fun as Buck Rogers. Have you guys done a review of that? We have not, and that's an excellent suggestion. I think that we would both be interested in doing. So thank you for that. That is something that we'll probably take under serious consideration, because we both like the Buck Rogers series. So that's a good suggestion there. Appreciate it.
And that is actually a good segue actually for something here real quick. So actually, because I was going to mention this earlier, but now it's maybe a good time to do it real quick. I mentioned to Eric that I might do this as my pop culture. So there's a fun magazine, actually it's out, that I've only recently become aware of, called Retro Man. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. It's actually published by Tomorrow's. They do like the Jack Kirby Collector. They do Draw. They do a lot of really great magazine material, specifically aimed at people who love primarily comic book material, but also like aspiring, professionals and comics historians. What's interesting about this particular issue of Retro Man, as you can see here, this is the Red Brown Captain America of the 1970s. He, of course, is wearing, in my mind, the iconic class in Captain America 2 Death Too Soon suit. If you are curious about this, I keep talking about my friend the Janimal. If you actually go on to the video section of the Retro Rogues fan page, you can actually find one of the earliest episodes that eventually led to this show, the In the Studio Retro Retrospective, where Jan and I actually talk about Captain America 2 Death Too Soon. But the other connection is this artwork on this cover is by my good friend Len Workman, who also co-created Bushi Tales with me. But because of his affiliation with this, I was made aware of this magazine. It's got a lot of really fun and interesting stuff in here that I think fans of our audience will find particularly entertaining. But this is really kind of fun and kind of cool. And this is actually a traditional piece that actually Len created that's used for the cover too. So yeah, something kind of fun there that I felt like is directly relatable, since we're talking about Buck Rogers and fun sci-fi adventure stuff from the kind of the 70s and the 80s. And along those lines, my friend Lynn is often sending me kind of fun things because he knows about things that I like. I thought I'd show these off real quick. He sent me a whole bunch of these Stargate action figures from back in the day when the original movie came out. I thought these are kind of fun. That's Anubis right there. And then we've got, I think, 2 different versions of the Horus guard here. These are the original ones that came out with the original film. But he sent me a package full of a whole bunch of fun stuff. There's the other Horus little guard guy right there. And then he also sent me, because he knows my love of Egyptian things, he actually sent me Ra. Even though this Ra is a lot more powerful looking, I think, visually than the one in the film, but no less intimidating. So there you go. There's something kind of fun for pop culture. Started off with in a weird direction. So there's that. So tell me,
I've actually been watching Stargate quite a bit on Comet. They have Stargate on Comet. I've been watching the series quite a bit. And then they've shown the movie as well. And there's actually another channel that shows the movie quite a bit that I can't recall right off the top of my head. But I'm a fan of both of them.
I love that movie. That movie was just, I've always loved that movie. And the musical score by David Arnold is so awesome. That's just, for me, that's one of those, when I think of classic orchestral movie scores, I obviously think of John Williams. I think of James Horner. I think of, John Barry. But David Arnold's work is really great. But I would definitely put his work on Stargate up there with any of those classic, sort of orchestral movie scores. I mean, I'd put it on the same shelf as even Empire or even, Wrath of Khan. I mean, that soundtrack is so
the score is amazing. Yeah, it's very, very well done. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So what do we have up first for pop culture news?
All right. So a few of you folks may have heard of this little show called The Mandalorian, and that it has got a season 2 on Disney Plus. And yesterday, the trailer came out for it for season 2. Now there isn't a whole ton of meat to this, unfortunately, but I thought we would go ahead and play it. We could talk about it a little bit. I have watched this, so this isn't a full brand new reaction. I did watch it a little bit earlier just so I kind of would have an idea of what was going on. So obviously here we get to see the ship back again. Funny thing I saw, there was somebody that was complaining about the fact that you can see the what's the term here? You can see the back door basically opening up while it's flying in space.
Yeah, the loading dock door or whatever is open.
Yeah, so you can see it opening up, and somebody was going off about like, oh, that's silly because wouldn't it decompress and everybody gets sucked out? Hey, folks, Star Wars is not science fiction. Okay, I've always made this argument. Star Wars is science, basically science fantasy. Okay, it is not supposed to be taken too seriously. All right, there are tons of instances actually with gunners and things like that where they clearly have like open space, like they're open to the vacuum of space, and they're not acting like they're open to the vacuum of space. Star Wars has always been that way. I just had to say that because somebody was going off about that, and I just thought that was so silly. Star Wars shouldn't be taken too seriously. I just got to say that. If you want to take it too seriously, get into Star Trek. Star Trek, you can have those kind of debates and stuff like that. That's why they're different. But anyway, somebody was complaining about that.
And if I was going to mention too, if you pay attention to the flight path, it's slightly erratic, and there's kind of some sparks coming off of it too. So the Raven Crest might be damaged as well.
Yeah, somebody made that point actually that was countering that. Now, I actually was talking. I think when we were talking about some of the pictures that were coming out for Mandalorian season 2. And of course, I thought this was interesting because that was one of the pictures that had come out was of the bantha, and so it looks like, at least to me, I mentioned this on the last broadcast. I hope we're not getting space banthas. That was one thing I thought was a little bit cheesy about Mandalorian season 2 was the idea of space Jawas. To me, that should be a Tatooine thing. So I'm just hopeful that this is going back to Tatooine. That this is going to be Tatooine. We don't have space sand people. And of course, my favorite, the Yodalorian. This is interesting. This is something I don't think we've really seen in Star Wars before. This is like a seaport. And that's not something that we've really seen in Star Wars before. And this is very, like, to me, this feels very like, I feel like I'm watching Hook, you know what I mean? Or something like that. It really doesn't, it almost doesn't feel like Star Wars, to be honest with you. It's really kind of weird. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but it's something that they've never done in Star Wars. So this is going to be sort of new ground, because I don't ever remember seeing something in Star Wars where they were on a ship, on water,
And if you wouldn't mind going back just a little bit to that shot, actually with actually right here. So this potentially, because I've watched this several times, and this reminded me of, because they're kind of reflecting on something, and I'm wondering if in their search for things, if they have walked upon or come up upon possibly, Clone Wars ended with a pretty big moment where a lot of the clones died, and all of Ahsoka's clones that had basically been in service with her, they turned on her, and because of what they had to do, they basically all died. And there was a big sort of like clone burial where they had like their rifles kind of stuck in the snow, and then they had their helmets on top of the rifles, and it was a really, because that's where they were all buried, and it was a really dramatic and kind of sort of somber moment, for Clone Wars, right? And then later on, they have where Vader is trying to track down Ahsoka, and then he basically, spoilers for Clone Wars, my apologies, spoiler alert. Vader comes upon that, and then these are a lot of the same clones that he served with as Anakin too, and it's kind of a big moment. And I'm wondering if possibly because of Filoni's connection to Clone Wars, and obviously the clones' connections to what was going on with Mandalore, I wonder if in this moment they might have come upon that one of those markers for that, basically mass graves for the clones. So there
interesting.
You go. Yeah, that's what I thought of when I saw this moment. And I kind of like the seaport idea. I think it's interesting.
So a lot of people are speculating on who this character is. There are a lot of people that think that this is a character from the Clone Wars. But there's been a lot of speculation on who this person is in this scene.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of people saying that they think it might even be Satine from Clone Wars. It'd be interesting to see who it actually ends up being.
And there you get a better kind of view of this ship. So it's kind of more like a barge of some kind or something like that.
Yeah.
A lot of people are speculating about this. And what's funny is, one thing I saw was saying how it looks like these X-Wings are sort of more like in a formation than they are like pursuing. And I disagree with that. I think that they're, because you can see them go to attack position. Then you see this scene where it looks like they might be chasing after him. So I'm just speculating, because I saw someone else talking about this and saying that they were speculating that the X-Wings were flying with him. I'm going to go the opposite. And I think that the New Republic is like after the Mandalorian, or there's some sort of conflict there. And of course, we've got some of our old characters returning. That's kind of neat. See multiple multiple TIE fighters this time. And it looks like we're going to be at some sort of facility, possibly, of the remnants of the Empire. Pretty cool shot there of the speeder bikes.
That is cool.
And of course, I think what a lot of people have been waiting for is to see the Mandalorian using that jetpack.
Yeah.
Now this is kind of weird. I don't know if this is supposed to be like the video game, that infamous video game that I think we've talked about before.
Masters of Terra Kasai.
Yeah, Terra Kasai, the Star Wars martial arts or whatever. I don't know if this is supposed to be some sort of callback to that or what.
I didn't hate Masters of Terra Kasai. I kind of had fun playing it back in the day, but it is kind of an oddity.
And that's kind one of the worst reviewed games I think ever made. I tried to find it because I wanted to have a complete collection of original PlayStation Star Wars games, and there's only like 5 of them. And I've had real difficulty finding that one to complete my collection.
Wow. I think I actually still own mine.
So I don't know how that's going to, this little fight thing. I don't know how that's going to play out. It'll be interesting. But the thing that I think I found most interesting about this trailer is just how much it doesn't show. We didn't get like a reveal of Ahsoka Tano. We didn't get to see like Boba Fett or, you know what I mean? Like Ahsoka, you know, we didn't get to see anything like that. Obviously, I wouldn't necessarily expect them to show us that kind of stuff in the trailer, but you know, you kind of hope, you know, that you get one of those big reveal kind of moments to be like, oh, cool, you know, we're going to have, you know, that rumor is totally confirmed and we can say that's going to happen and we get to go see that, you know?
Right. Well, and I get
a scene from Hooked.
Well, I think it'll be fun. I'm really excited about it. And I trust what they've been doing because I enjoyed the first season so much. I really had a lot, and you know, we did a lot of our speculation stuff, and boy, my speculation stuff couldn't have been more wrong at times. But still had a lot of fun watching the first season. I'm excited for the second one. And then James Stone actually says in relation to the port shot, he says that port shot reminds me a bit of Solo. I could totally see that. He says when they were in prison with Chewie. In visual tone at least, and I'd say I could say it definitely reminds me of that. And it'll be interesting to see how this all comes together, you know. And I like that shot too where they're coming into the town at night and they've just got like the street lamps on or whatever. That's kind of fun. I thought that shot was really kind of cool, and it's amazing how immersive and expansive they're able to make the world, considering how much that we learned about how they're actually using that technology they're using with that video wall and how they're interacting that with practical stuff that's, you know, on the set. And it's interesting how they're able to do that because it creates a really, truly immersive kind of environment. Because that's a lot of amazing setups. I mean, on an older Star Wars movie, that's a lot of money to spend. You know, all those different environments they showed us. So I'm excited for it. I think it'll be fun. A lot of people were saying that they felt like that you can see a lot of the Mon Calamari. They're thinking that maybe that they'll be in that ocean port, you know, city. We'll see kind of more of them, and that would be fun. I like Admiral Akbar's people. That'd be cool. So I'm down. Looks like it'd be a lot of fun.
And Jane mentions that Ronnie surprised her with a Mandalorian bobblehead to go with her Baby Yoda bobblehead.
All right.
That's very cool. Very cool. And then Jackie's coming in to say hi. Thanks for checking us out. We appreciate it.
So yeah, I'm pretty excited for it. So yeah. So tell me, Eric, what else do you have up for this? This episode's pop culture news.
Well, we talked off the air about how exactly we should handle this. So this is rumor, but this is a rumor that we have both been hearing things about, and so we thought we would address it. This is from a blog called Giant Freaking Robot, and there is speculation out there that all is not well in the production environment of The Mandalorian. And the title here reads, "The Mandalorian is being written out of The Mandalorian." You're like, what the heck does that mean? So there is a rumor that has been started by a YouTuber who claims, of course, to have sources. And basically the rumor is saying that all is not well in terms of Pascal's feelings about the portrayal of the Mandalorian. And the allegation the specific allegation is that Pedro Pascal is sick of wearing the helmet, even though he's barely in the helmet, because there's all sorts of information out there that we've even talked about on this show, stuff that also came out from the Disney Gallery episodes that say that Pedro Pascal is almost never in the outfit. He's almost never in that suit. He's pretty much doing voiceovers. But the rumor is that he doesn't like even the little bit he does in the suit. He wants to show his face, his beautiful, wonderful face, which, you know, I've kind of mentioned several times during our reviews of The Mandalorian, because we have reviewed every single episode on this program. We also reviewed every single episode of the Disney Gallery series based on The Mandalorian. That's something that I, as a Star Wars fan, really dislike when I hear stuff like that. And you can see this. You can see this with the Marvel films, that these actors do not like to wear the masks. They do not like to embrace the character in that way, especially actors that feel like they have a name, you know? They want to show their glorious mug to everybody. So again, this is just a rumor. But from my own perspective, I could totally see this being true, because I see it with the Marvel properties and with superhero movies in general. These actors do not seem to enjoy wearing the masks. They feel like we've got to see their face. And I think what's really ironic about this particular story, if it's true, is everything that I hear says Pedro Pascal is barely ever in the helmet to begin with. He's barely ever on set. In fact, I know that Ron Howard's daughter, she was one of the directors. She said specifically she's never worked with the guy. He was not involved in her episode at all. So it's a disturbing rumor. Dave and I both heard about it, so I thought we should bring it up.
Yeah, and I've been hearing about it from multiple different sources, and different people have been commenting on it and asking my opinion. And so we thought we would bring it up here on the show. It's important to remember this is just a rumor. And as far as I could tell, the source of this is Grace Randolph. That kind of starts with her, essentially. So I don't know how much I would put, how much stock I would put into this. I hope it's not true, because the idea of the Mandalorian without the Mandalorian is like a Batman show without Batman. And that would never happen, right? So anyhow, I just...
But who is the Mandalorian? That's the better question. Who really is the Mandalorian? Is it John Wayne's grandson? Is it the other gentleman? Or is it the other gentleman who does most of the martial arts? Because we've watched the gallery, and we know there are multiple people who play the Mandalorian. So who really is the one who owns this character? Is it Pedro Pascal simply because he does the voice? I know among Star Wars fans, hardcore Star Wars fans, nobody is going to argue that somehow James Earl Jones owns the part of Darth Vader more than David Prowse. No hardcore Star Wars fan is going to make that argument. Of course, you love James Earl Jones's voice, and it's awesome that he can still do that, whereas David Prowse physically cannot be Darth Vader right now. He's just not in physical shape to do it, okay? But I don't think any hardcore Star Wars fan is going to somehow argue that James Earl Jones owns the part more than David Prowse. You know what I mean? Maybe some of the new fans will make that argument because they don't know what they're talking about, but the hardcore fans would not do that, any more than they would try to take away, R2D2 from Kenny Baker because he doesn't make the beeps and the bloops, and in some of the scenes it really is just a robot. You know what I mean? We're not like that. You know what I mean? We Star Wars fans appreciate the guys in the masks. They matter to us. They are stars in their own right. The original Boba Fett, Jeremy Bullock, these are people that mean something to us. And so unfortunately with a lot of the modern actors, they don't get that. They just don't get that. And I always say the most ironic thing about this is, if you know anything about the history of acting, and when acting started to really become something that we see today, the origins of the acting we see today come from ancient Greece, and in ancient Greece, they all wore masks. They all wore masks. In fact, there's speculation that they had some sort of amplification device within the masks, and that's one of the reasons they used it. The other being that they could, you can't emote in a stage context the way that you can with a television or a movie series where they can do the close-ups and things like that. Back in those days, you'd be in an amphitheater, you'd be far away from the actors. There's people in the back row, and those actors had to act for them just as much as they acted for the people in the front row. And so it was obviously different, and theater acting is obviously different. But still, it's like, geez, if you're an actor, you should know that, and you should be honored to go back to that old tradition and wear a mask. To me, I just think that's a cool thing. I think it's really cool when an actor can act through a mask. That shows that they're a real actor. When you don't have that canvas, which is your face, that you can use to express all your emotions, you have to make like subtle movements, and you kind of have to jerk your head a certain way or emote with your hands, the way David Prowse did as Darth Vader. And we all love Darth Vader, don't we? That's my favorite thing in Star Wars is Darth Vader. So I don't get it. If there's any truth to this, I just feel like, oh boy.
Well, and for me, like one of my favorite performances still to this day is Peter Weller as RoboCop. And even though you can see, kind of from the base of his nose down, and you can see his mouth, the thing that makes Peter Weller's performance so amazing is what he does with his body, what he does with his hands,
right?
How he moves, the power, the control, it's what really sells you and makes you believe, that he is this cyborg. And that's a huge thing, that's a huge thing. And then just like in The Mandalorian, when they finally do kind of give us a reveal of the face, it's done for dramatic effect. It's not just so we can see his face per se. It's because in that moment and that particular moment in the story, we need to understand what he's really feeling. So they show us his eyes, and it's powerful and it's important. Almost as much as the first time we even see his eyes, and we see the determination when it looks like the Ed 209 is going to take him out, and we see his resolve, to stay strong in that moment. So, but it's his overall body performance in the suit and behind that visor that really sells it. I was nervous to meet Jeremy Bulloch. I was a huge Boba Fett fan. I was so nervous to meet him when I met him several years ago, and one of the few autograph photos I have that actually hang on my wall is actually from the day that I got to meet Jeremy Bulloch, the original Boba Fett. That was a big thing. Huge fan. So, and he has very little screen time, but for me, that character was so important. And when you see him, it's like, for example, like when he's taking those shots at Luke, he could have totally shot Luke. You could tell by the way he's standing, the command he's using his blaster. He could have took Luke's head straight off if he really wanted, but that's not what he was being paid to do. And that's the thing. It's those little subtle things in the performance, that really, kind of attach you to that character, and make you buy into the idea that they want you to understand about who they are, or the job that they're doing, right? And I think it's unfortunate when you hear stuff like this. I hope it is just a rumor and none of it's true, because I feel like it's really unfortunate. And along those lines about Vader and the man in the mask and showing the face, I don't know exactly where you can watch it right now, but there's a really great documentary about David Prowse called "I Am Your Father" that's actually really, really good and really interesting, for those Star Wars fans who maybe haven't heard about it. But there's a really great documentary. Check it out. I Am Your Father.
Yeah, that is a very good documentary. Jackie had a few comments. She said, I've watched The Mandalorian 3 times already. Looking forward to the new season. I think I might have watched it about that many times myself, and I am looking forward to the next season as well. And she said, I think if he didn't want to wear it, then he should not have taken the part. You cannot have the Mandalorian without Mando. She goes on, a great actor embraces the character, becomes the character. The character does not become the actor. But that is just my opinion. And I agree with that opinion. And I think a lot of modern actors don't understand that. It's not about you. It's about the character, and you do what you need to make the character. A lot of these actors, I think, what it comes down to is it's self promotion, and they feel like their mug is their billboard, their advertisement, and if you're not showing their mug, you're taking something away from them. That's my 2 cents.
And along those lines, Lon Chaney, they used to call him the man of 1,000 faces. Yeah. Lon Chaney was one of those really great actors back from the golden age of cinema, and he played so many wonderful roles, and he has such an amazing legacy that still kind of endures. Part of the reason I know about him is because of his legacy. And we do have some modern actors who do embrace that concept. I think of Doug Jones specifically. I know that
Doug Jones is a good example. Yeah, absolutely.
And I know Eric's not a huge fan of Discovery, but I really liked his work as Saru in Discovery. But more importantly, he's portrayed the Silver Surfer. He played Abe Sapien in Hellboy. He was one of the major creatures in Pan's Labyrinth. And that's the thing. He inhabits and becomes these different creatures, these different characters, and he's beloved because of all the amazing things that he's done. And a lot of times he's not using his voice. He's hidden behind makeup, but he still understands in my mind, what it means to be like a true genre actor, and he inhabits those roles and he brings them to life. I'm very excited to see him return as Saru actually in Discovery. I felt like he was the most, my favorite character that emerged out of Discovery. And I really liked that episode, A Sound of Thunder, which is all about his people, the Kelpians. I thought that was actually a fun episode, actually of Star Trek of all things. So there are some actors who understand that and embody that idea. And I'll be honest with you, if this is true, Pascal can leave and let's just let John Wayne's grandson do it, and we'll get a voiceover guy to do the voice, and we'll all be good. We'll be good. I like the idea that the Mando is John Wayne's grandson. I totally love that. I sign off on that right now. So it's my seal of approval.
I don't remember his name, but there is another actor that does most of the stunt work. Wayne does a lot of the, as you might imagine, a lot of the gun work and things like that. That's what he does, and then. There is another actor who does a lot of the more of the martial arts and fighting type of stuff. So again, Pedro Pascal does not own the part exclusively anyway. James Stone kind of flips the script on us a little bit. He says, I've heard the case where actors do want to wear the masks. Stallone and Judge Dredd, and the studio wants that recognition to promote the films. I'm sure that's a factor as well. And James, I've actually heard that story as well. In fact, I remember when the original Judge Dredd film came out, and they did not show Stallone's face at all in the original previews. And the original preview was really, really good and very serious. And it always makes me wonder if there were some reshoots done to make it more comedic, because the original trailer I remember seeing in the theater was very serious. And I was like, what the heck is this? Because I didn't really know about Judge Dredd. I didn't grow up in England. I grew up in the United States. I didn't really know about Judge Dredd, and I was just fascinated. And then by the time the second trailer came out, Stallone's face was everywhere. And all of a sudden, some of the cheesy jokes are coming in because, Schneider was in it and stuff. And I've heard that story. That the studio basically said, hey, what are you guys doing? You're not showing Stallone's face. This is a Stallone movie. Because they didn't get it. We do have the other Judge Dredd film, the Carl Urban version, and I know for a fact Carl Urban insisted I am not taking the helmet off. He said, I know enough about Judge Dredd, I'm not taking the helmet off. And a lot of people do consider that second film superior to the Stallone version. I like both, to be honest with you. But I've heard the story that Carl Urban said, I am not taking the helmet off. Judge Dredd doesn't take the helmet off, I'm not taking the helmet off. And it does show you how different actors do approach these things differently and have their own attitudes. And sometimes the studios do get involved and kind of screw everything up. But that's not the case here. I think in the case here, at least Favreau and Filoni, they understand. They're the ones who made the rule. They're the ones who said the Mandalorian doesn't take his helmet off. That's part of the mystique. Plus, I think they just get it because that's part of the mystique of Star Wars has always had, from the original Boba Fett, from Darth Vader, all these different characters. No, we don't want to see their face. We don't need to see their face. It takes away when we see their face. You know what I mean? So you never know. Sometimes it could be the studio is the one making the issue of it, but a lot of times, the opposite is true as well.
And I was going to say, Carl Urban's another one of those in my mind great genre actors. He isn't obscured and hidden his makeup as much as Doug Jones. I feel like Doug Jones, if there was going to be a new man of 1,000 faces, kind of idea, that kind of genre actor who inhabits a part where the part's more important than necessarily them, and they build a legacy that way. I think that Doug Jones is probably, I think for my generation anyway, that would be him. But along those same lines, Carl Urban's another one of those great genre actors who inhabits the role that he takes on. I mean, when he was in the new Star Trek movies, say what you will about those movies, he does a great job of trying to, become Bones McCoy. And in all the interviews, he's talking about like how much he loved Star Trek as a kid and how he wanted to do justice to what DeForest Kelley brought to, Dr. McCoy. And that's such a completely different thing from what he does in Dredd as Judge Dredd. Those two things could not be more dissimilar.
Right.
And he is great in Dredd. I would love to talk about Dredd on this show. I friggin' love Dredd. That's one of my favorite of the newer of the sci-fi action kind of movies I've seen. I love Dredd. That was such a great movie. And Carl Urban is absolutely fantastic, as is the actress who plays Judge Anderson as well. That's a great movie. Highly recommend Dredd.
Another one of those ones that I think is hard to find right now too, as far as if you want to watch it.
Oh, and I will single out the Stallone Dredd movie for this too. It's got great production design. It's a fun movie. I actually quite like Armand Assante as the villain in that, Rico. He's got this really powerhouse performance that I love. It's very chew the scenery, kind of over the top at times. I love that performance. And the score by Alan Silvestri is absolutely awesome, especially the pieces that he did for when they go out into the Badlands. Man, that music is really great. So, in my opinion,
I own that soundtrack. I own the soundtrack.
I love that soundtrack.
The Stallone Judge Dredd.
Yeah,
I own the soundtrack
love that.
for that.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a Cure song on there that's I think actually called the Dredd song.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I actually had a college radio show, and I used that as my theme song every time when I went on the air. So yeah, I totally understand that score. James also mentions a very obvious one. Ron Perlman is also underrated as a makeup actor. Yeah, you're absolutely true. I remember watching Beauty and the Beast with my mom. I used to watch that all the time. And of course, he was also in Hellboy. He was Hellboy. And he's one of those guys that also I think has been always willing to do that, to not make it about, you've got to see my mug, you got to see my face. If anything, I think a lot of people kind of regard his normal face as being kind of distinctive in and of itself, right? So he gets a lot of those tough guy roles and things like that. So he's able to do other things with makeup, so.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. So, like again, we said this story is just rumor, but we thought it would be worth, highlighting and talking about. Do you have, what else do you have for pop culture? Or do we want to move to streaming wars or?
Yeah, I think we can move to streaming wars.
Okay.
We're almost at the 2.5 hour mark. You can believe that. So.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot to cover with Cobra Kai, since we basically had to make up for last episode and then obviously cover the material we wanted to cover for this one as well, because we basically did 9 episodes tonight, and we just went on and on about how great the pilot episode was in our last episode.
That's right. Right.
All right, very cool. So if you don't mind, I'll set up the Streaming Wars segment and we'll get on with it. So here in the Streaming Wars segment, we want to talk about anything that's happening in the world of Obviously, streaming. You may ask yourself, streaming, is that like fish and stream? No. We're going to stop using those fish analogies. No, we're not talking about streams like river and streams. We're obviously talking about streaming video, whether it's live streaming like what we're doing right now. But primarily, we're talking about those particular services a lot of us enjoy. We've been talking a lot about Netflix tonight because of Cobra Kai being on Netflix. But there's a lot of other great services such as Hulu, some kind of Apple thing no one talks about anymore. There's a Peacock thing we don't talk about that much anymore. Anyhow, there's a lot of other great streaming services that exist, including some of them that are probably not going to be with us very long, like DC Universe. But anyhow, we want to talk about all the things that are happening that's interesting that we think you, our dear valued viewer, our dear valued listener, would like to talk about that's happening in the world of the streaming wars. So tell me, Eric, what do you have up first for this episode's installment of the streaming wars?
Well, we've been talking a lot about Mulan, and I am continuing to try to find out as much information as I can about Mulan and what kind of a hit or miss Mulan really was. Now, this is a difficult story to track, folks, because of the way Mulan was released. Mulan was in the United States released only on Disney Plus as an add-on that you had to pay $30 for. But it was also released theatrically in a lot of other countries, including China. So this is, again, one of those sort of difficult stories to track, but I think it's very relevant in the world of the streaming wars because I've said this many times. If this model works, if Disney thinks they had a home run in terms of making Mulan an add-on to Disney Plus for $30, they are going to duplicate this model. I guarantee you. If it didn't work, there's a good chance they'll never do this again. And that's what I'm hoping for. So I am biased in this reporting. I'm telling you right now, because I do not want to have to pay extra money anytime a new movie comes out from Disney, and I want to see it on Disney Plus. I already pay money for Disney Plus. I don't feel like I should have to pay more every single time a new movie comes out. So that said, title of this article reads Mulan's 2020 box office explained. Was it a success for Disney Plus? Releasing the highly anticipated live action remake on Disney Plus was a massive risk for Disney. Did Mulan's box office make it a success? That's the question. So Disney's latest live action remake Mulan premiered on Disney Plus to mixed reviews and a 68% increase in subscribers for the streaming service. So can it be considered a box office success? Now, one of the big questions with this is, can we compare this to anything else? And yes, we have something else to compare it to, which is Hamilton. Now, Hamilton gave Disney Plus a 74% increase in Disney Plus subscribers. Because again, Disney's not going to give us their numbers and tell us how many people bought Mulan. Okay? That's not going to happen. So all we can do is look at the numbers in terms of how many were downloading Disney Plus, at the time that Hamilton came out, and then now as Mulan came out. And we can see that Hamilton had a bigger number, but it's not that much bigger. 68% compared to 74%. And it's important to remember Hamilton didn't cost anything extra. So the folks that signed up for Disney Plus, because of Hamilton, Hamilton gave it that bump. The Disney didn't get any additional revenue other than the new subscribers. With Mulan, they got the additional subscribers plus that $30 people were paying for the movie. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. So it says it's difficult to say if Mulan was a box office success for Disney or a failure. Like the much maligned live action remake of Dumbo, which premiered in 2019 to disappointing opening box office number of 45 million domestically. Despite the mixed reviews and controversies surrounding the movie, Mulan seems to have been successful for Disney Plus, although it has one of the most disappointing box offices out of Disney's live action remakes. It says Mulan will likely not make back its $20+ million budget. And one of the big reasons for that, and we kind of mentioned this on the last week's episode, one of the big reasons for that is it did not perform well in China. And I think if Disney had been sort of hoping, or that was kind of one of the reasons that they made Mulan, was the hope that they could kind of get, into the Chinese market more. Massive miscalculation, because the Chinese movie industry, which there's a very vibrant movie industry in China, They make movies like this all the time. They make epic movies like this all the time based on, big war epics and the history of China. And you can't, you're not going to out Chinese the Chinese. That's kind of the thing I think that is kind of silly. You could make the argument, I think, that, Asians might be underrepresented in Hollywood films. You could definitely make that argument. You can't make that argument in Chinese cinema, okay? If anything, the only argument you could make there is that maybe they underrepresent other races like Europeans and blacks and things like that, okay? They do not underrepresent Asian people. They do not underrepresent Chinese people in Chinese cinema. And the Chinese cinema, it does very well in China. They have a very vibrant movie industry in China. So I think if that was what Disney was kind of hoping to do, that was a massive miscalculation. So the bottom line is, it does seem like the jury is still a little bit out on this. It says Mulan made a total of $35.5 million on its opening weekend from Disney Plus subscribers. So it says, that's good when you consider the fact that they don't have to share that money with anybody. If you release a movie theatrically, you're typically going to have to share that money, and Disney didn't have to do that in this case. So again, this is one of those things that's sort of difficult to track. I don't think it's been the success that Disney Plus had hoped for. I think they definitely wanted more. But I think the jury is still out about whether this is going to be a model that is duplicated in the future. And if we are going to, as Disney Plus subscribers, which many of us are, if we're going to see this model being used again, where they're going to ask us to pay a premium for a new movie coming out on Disney Plus.
Well, I'm in the camp where it's kind of weird, because if they'd done this with Black Widow, I would have paid to watch Black Widow. I would have liked to have been able to pay to watch New Mutants, for example, because New Mutants is not one of those films that I even want to kind of risk my health just to go see. You know what I mean? I just, as much as I was excited to see it, I'm not going to do that. So I would have been willing to obviously pay to watch New Mutants. I just, with Mulan, it was one of those things, as much as I love martial arts, this film just really didn't capture my attention very much. I remember seeing the animated film when it came out. But also, too, kind of like you, Eric, I want to support the idea of them releasing things VOD. But it's just, this film isn't one of those that I was excited to pay the amount of money that they wanted for it. If it hadn't been as much, because I want to support VOD, I would have possibly done this, and we would have probably rented it or watched it or whatever. But I did not want to pay the amount of money that they wanted for this film. I just simply didn't. I don't have a household that has a bunch of kids, so when I go to the movie theater, it isn't as much as what some people are paying when they go to the movie theater with children. My wife and I, it's just the two of us, so we don't pay nearly as much as I think the movie theaters think we as a quote unquote household pay when we go to the movie theater. We just don't. There's only two of us. So for me, this just didn't make any sense. And then you add to the fact that I wasn't like a huge fan of the movie to begin with. And there was no motivation for me to spend that money. And then it got even weirder, too, when they announced that Mulan was going to be coming out as a part of the Disney Plus subscription model, like a couple months later anyway. It's like, well, that's kind of insulting for those people that shelled out that money. You're going to tell them it's going to be out in a couple of months. Maybe they should have just waited. So I feel like this whole thing that they tried to do with this, I feel like that to test this with Mulan, I personally feel like Mulan was not the right film to do this with, because it while it has its fans and it had some buzz, I don't think that it had the buzz, for example, a Marvel movie would have had. And then secondly, the price tag was incredibly high. So I'm not too surprised that the results, even though they're not being reported in totality, in an obviously, discernible manner, I'm not surprised that even from the outside looking in, that it appears that they had mixed results, because I feel like they picked, I think the film in my mind to really test this with was New Mutants. That was the film to test this with. It has a little bit of the cachet of the Marvel. it's a film that they're not so heavily invested in. If it hadn't done well, that it's like, oh, well, this clearly doesn't work. But on the flip side, if they'd made a good chunk of change, it would help them recoup some of the money that Fox had invested into the New Mutants film in the first time. I know contractually they couldn't do that, but I really feel like New Mutants was the film to test this with, not Mulan.
Yeah, and I just hate the whole model. I just think it's a terrible model. I don't want to mix subscription video on demand with iTunes. You know what I mean? Those are two separate things. Those are two separate entities. If you want to download your movies, you can download your movies on iTunes. You can download your movies on PlayStation Store. You can download your movies on YouTube now. I mean, you can download your movies on all sorts of platforms. I just don't want the cross-pollination of the two. I'm already paying for Disney Plus. I don't want to pay no more. You know what I mean, for Disney Plus if I'm trying to watch something on it. So that's the main thing for me. Jackie mentions that I guess her family actually did see it. And she said there was one character that was missing that the kids in my family loved, and they were very disappointed. One thing that I did hear was that this is not really a remake of the animated film. They tried to make it more like the actual Chinese, story, the real story, from China. You know what I mean? So they tried to make it more, quote unquote, like authentic to the actual history of the story in China, which again, I think was because they were trying to pander to China. But my argument would have been, if I had been an executive in that room, I would have said, we're Disney. We're not going to make a better, quote unquote, authentic Chinese film than the Chinese cinema is going to do. Why are we even trying? We're Disney. We Disneyfy things, so it's like, why would we even been trying to do that game? If we're going to make a live action remake of this animated film, let's make let's make a live action version of this animated film. So I have heard that. I've heard that from other sources, Jackie, that this wasn't like even a 100% real adaptation of the animated film. So I think that's kind of confused people and disappointed people, because that's what they wanted. They wanted to see a live action version of Mulan. That's the way that Disney markets a lot of this stuff is, hey, we're going to do one of your favorite Disney films. We're just going to do it live action. It's not going to be animated. And Jane mentions, do you think this hurt Mulan's success that it could be? And Jane, I'm not sure if you were referring to what Jackie was saying or something that I was saying earlier, but I do think that the whole model is confusing to some people. Jackie mentions, I remember buying a DVD for $30 to pay that, but not have it forever made me not want to pay it. If you cancel Disney Plus, did you lose the movie that you pretty much purchased? Yes, you do. That was one of the controversial aspects of this as well, is Disney also made a sort of strange model in that basically they decided that for those of you that did decide to purchase this, you only have this film as long as you have Disney Plus. And that's another controversial aspect of this particular business model. Again, if I went and bought this on iTunes, if it had been available on iTunes, or if I bought it on the PlayStation Store, or bought it on one of these other traditional VOD sites like Amazon, I now own the movie. I can download it. I can put it onto a CD or something like that. I can put it on a flash drive and it's mine. You can't do that with Mulan. With Mulan, you only have it as long as you have Disney Plus.
Yeah, like I said, the whole thing, like I said with this, I was not a fan of. I like the idea of having first release, films available. I like that idea a lot, because I think that's a way in which a lot of us can see movies that are currently not getting to see a lot of new content. But yeah, the way they handled this, I don't think is the way to go. At least it definitely doesn't work for me. So that's pretty much my whole hot take on this whole thing, which I consider a hot mess. So a hot take on a hot mess.
Yeah, and Jane clarified, she was talking about the extra cost. And yeah, I do think that's a huge turnoff. I think cost they kind of miscalculated that. And Jackie makes the point, you're paying movie theater prices to watch at home and laugh my ass off, So
yeah. Well, and a part of that, I mean, and see, that's the thing. I think with the right film, they could have gotten what they were asking for. But I don't think every film, deserves this kind of price tag. For example, I think a good example, which I think some people have forgotten now because of where we are, but for myself, I know that, for example, there's certain movies that when they come out back in the day when we were, we did, I don't buy as much physical media as I used to, but I still like physical media. But there are certain things when they come out, I want to have the Blu-ray, the DVD, the whatever, because I want to own tangibly that thing. There are certain things that I will run out and get the day that it comes out. There was a time in which any DC animated movie I would buy day and date release. It almost didn't matter what it was. I was very excited, for example, to get Batman Year One. I thought Batman Year One was really good. I was a little disappointed with Killing Joke. But I also bought All-Star Superman. A little biased, but I bought, the Flashpoint Paradox movie. Like, I used to buy those as soon as they would come out, because I wanted to support DC with what they were doing, because I liked the fact that they were taking classic comic stories and adapt them in an animated form. And then secondly, just that I like the idea of owning it too, because I'm a bit of a completist. But then there's other films that's like, I can wait. I don't have to own that right away. So I would wait for those films to show up, in a discount bin, any movie in this bin for $5, or along those same lines, going even further back in the day, back when we used to have things like Blockbuster Video and stuff, you had the previously viewed movies, and sometimes you could get something for $3 or $4, so, there's certain movies. It's like, if the price tag is right, I will buy it. But this whole thing with Mulan, that's a hard pass for me because I'm not a huge fan of the film. So that's just not going to work for me. In all honesty, I don't even know if I'd had kids if they'd been excited to see this, to be honest. They're just to me, this didn't really tap into what the animated Mulan film did. It was something different. It wasn't the same thing. And that's the thing that's kind of weird. It's like, you can't expect the same kind of results for something you're adapting to live action that you're going to change that much. So so I think a lot of factors impacted this movie. And again, I don't think this movie was the one to test this distribution model with. But then again, maybe it was, because they saw that clearly that it's not going to work the way they thought it was. So maybe this was the film to test it with.
Yeah, well, I just don't like the model. Regardless
right, yeah.
So.
Yeah, I get that. I don't either. I'm just saying, it's like, if it had been a different film, something that people were really excited about, I think it might have gotten a different result. I feel like the results for Mulan is probably about what Mulan would have done. For example, my wife and I went and we saw that Alexander Skarsgård, the actress who plays Harley Quinn now, what's her name? I can't remember her name. They were in a Tarzan movie. I really, really like Tarzan. I grew up watching Tarzan and was excited to go see it. I like both of the main people, the principals involved in it. I was hoping it was going to be more faithful to the old Edgar Rice Burroughs books. We're just really excited to go see it. It did okay at the box office, but it didn't set any records, But then again, it's like, well, what did you expect? As popular as Tarzan is with a certain segment of the marketplace, there's a lot of people who don't even probably understand who Tarzan is beyond the animated film. And that movie and the animated film couldn't have been more dissimilar. It's not the same thing, so it's that idea of you're trying to sell something to an existing fan base and you change it so much. And then the fan base goes, well, this isn't what I liked. This is something else now.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's true. That definitely happens.
Yeah. So very cool. What else do you have for Streaming Wars this week?
Just one and done for me. So.
All right. Well, there you go. I did have one I wanted to talk about. If I can get my show notes to actually pull up. something I thought was worth discussing. Get this over here on the screen. So we've talked a lot about how things in the streaming sphere are changing, right? And we're already seeing the impact of all the different streaming services kind of impacting. Well, the impact of all the different streaming services basically sort of hurting their different um, sort of audiences and whatever. Just basically there's too many of them. So um, and it's curious because we'd had some conversations before about what did we think was going to happen with some of the streaming services. I talked before about how I felt like DC Universe was probably going to be the first one to go because we had HBO Max coming out, and it just certain things didn't make sense, right? So this is interesting. So this came out of Variety. This actually is from yesterday. Eric and I had talked about this previously. This is by Cynthia Littleton, and it says CBS All Access to rebrand as Paramount Plus earlier next year. Now, there were some more snarkier headlines for this that were actually kind of funny. There was one that says CBS All Access to become Paramount Plus next year because branding is hard, which is kind of funny. But it says, and this is interesting too, the things that are coming along with this, sort of rebranding. There's going to be a Godfather-inspired drama, The Offer, and reboot of The Game, among other original series in the works. So we'll get into this here just real briefly. But here's the logo that they kind of unveiled, Paramount Plus. Obviously, the classic, kind of Paramount, kind of icon there. So it just says Viacom CBS hopes to become a bigger player in the global streaming business with the rebrand of CBS All Access as Paramount Plus early next year. The new name will coincide with another expansion of its original programming efforts and its archive of programming drawn from the newly combined Viacom and CBS Corp archives. Viacom CBS vowed to rev up efforts to expand the services overseas, where Paramount Pictures, the company's most established, I'm not exactly sure how I was reading that, vowed to rev up efforts to expand the service overseas, where Paramount Pictures, the company's most established studio brand. I think it made me with. Anyhow, Paramount is an iconic and storied brand beloved by consumers all over the world, and it's synonymous with quality, integrity, and world-class storytelling, said Bob Bakish. I almost said Baskin. That would have probably got us banned on YouTube if I'd said the word Baskin. The president, CEO of Viacom CBS. With Paramount Plus, we're excited to establish one global streaming brand in the broad pay segment that will draw on the sheer breadth and depth of the Viacom CBS portfolio to offer an extraordinary collection of content for everyone to enjoy. Is anyone still awake? Anyhow, so here's the thing. We kind of knew a lot of this was going to be happening, right? Because we talked about it here as we've been covering the various things of the streaming wars. You can go to Variety and read the rest of this article if you so choose to do so. But it's just kind of interesting. This is obviously, too, this is a byproduct of the remerger of CBS and Viacom. We're still kind of hoping what's going to happen with the Star Trek productions, because there was apparently certain things that had been reported that they couldn't do with Star Trek. And then apparently there's been some reporting that we've seen where there's some infighting over what to do with the direction of Star Trek as well. So I'm curious to see if there's a lot of different things that are coming from the various channels that they have. If you're on CBS All Access right now, for example, like Comedy Century's a specific dedicated channel. BET's a specific dedicated channel. Obviously CBS, like there's a general CBS one, but each one of the major sort of brands is sort of its own channel, kind of in this. And I think in all honesty, they just took this from looking at what Disney Plus was doing, where you go into Disney Plus and there's a Marvel channel, there's a Disney channel, there's a, you know what I mean? Like, I just think everyone's just looking what everyone else is doing and goes, oh, that's a good idea, let's do that. So I'm curious to see if there'll be like we know that we're getting Strange New Worlds, and that won't necessarily be a Paramount Plus, even though it will be. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what this all means. I just thought it was worth reporting because CBS All Access is also going away and becoming something else. So, what did you think about this? 'Cause I know we talked about it just briefly before the show started, Eric. What did you think about this announcement about Paramount Plus?
Well, I've seen some of that snarky coverage as well, and I think it's kind of like if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. And I think that this is a smart move by CBS All Access. I think the CBS brand is damaged personally. You and I disagree, I guess, quite a bit on Discovery and some of the other Star Trek properties. We do not disagree about the disaster that Picard is, and we don't disagree that Lower Decks is a misfire as well. So I think CBS has damaged the brand quite a bit. So I think that this is a good move. Use the brand that's not all damaged and destroyed by all this stuff. Use Paramount. Paramount has always been a very good and solid brand. You can see it on the CBS All Access streaming channel. You can see all the good shows that Paramount has made over the years. And they were not made by CBS. They were made by Paramount Television, including Star Trek. A little fun fact there. Pretty much there's only been 3 studios that have made Star Trek shows. They'd be being Desilu, Paramount, and CBS. And I think CBS has really screwed it up. And I think Paramount did a great job. So I'm kind of hopeful that this kind of means that there might be some better Trek on the horizon. But more than that, I think it's a good move for their brand, because I think the CBS brand is a little bit damaged right now, and Paramount is not quite in the same position as they are. And it's an iconic brand. It's an iconic brand that's been around for a very long time. So I think it was just a no-brainer move. All the snarky comments aside and things, it's that original. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
I think it was a bad move when Viacom split in the first place.
Yeah.
I think it was just one of those really stupid things where they thought that they would go against the grain because everybody else is consolidating, and they said, hey, we're going to be different. We're not going to consolidate. We're going to divide our assets. And it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster, in my opinion, that CBS ever got a hold of Star Trek. Just going to say it. I think it was an absolute disaster to let CBS have anything to do with Star Trek. I will say it again. I think it was an absolute disaster to allow CBS to have anything to do with Star Trek. Paramount has made Star Trek ever since Desilu became part of Paramount. So, they should have just left it there. It was a bad move. And they're paying for it. But I think that this is hopefully a move in the right direction. One thing they do need to do is they got to fix that PlayStation 4 app, because it doesn't work right, and you don't get the Paramount movies on the PlayStation 4 app, which is one of the reasons that I went ahead and canceled my subscription. That, and I hated Lower Decks. But it doesn't work right. I can't get the movies. I only get all the stupid CBS crap. You know what I mean? I can't get the actual Paramount movies on the PlayStation 4 app. So they do have some other things they need to work on, but I think that this is a good move in the right direction. They needed to do something, and I think this will help them get attention, and it obviously is. I mean, this is a Variety article. We're talking about it. CBS All Access has been sort of in the lower gutters of the streaming wars. A lot of the coverage, a lot of the times when I'm trying to find articles, nobody even gives a crap about CBS All Access. They are completely off the grid, and this is getting them some attention. So it's a good move by them.
Right. Well, and just to be clear, I really liked season 2 of Discovery, and I'm hopeful that hopefully season 3 will hopefully be more like season 2 and less like season 1, because I felt like they had a lot of fun episodes in season 2, and so I'm hopeful season 3 will be good. I'm nervous about what we learned so far about season 3. But the big thing I'm really, really super hopeful for is I'm really hoping that Strange New Worlds will be hopefully more of a return to classic Trek. That's what I'm hoping for. They have the opportunity, if some of the executives have been seeing what's been going and they've been paying attention to the fan reaction, Strange New Worlds is where they could maybe make some adjustments and give us a more classic, kind of style Trek show to go alongside maybe these other things where they're trying to be more experimental. but we won't know until we learn more about Strange New Worlds. But yeah, Picard. I hated Picard. I think that I'm pretty well on the books about that. Picard has damaged how I look at Next Gen. I can't watch Next Gen anymore because every time I see Picard, I think about I can't even watch Next Gen anymore. And then Lower Decks. I went ahead and watched the next episode of Lower Decks. And I actually had a couple laughs with it, but I still don't think it's very good. So it has a lot of problems. So it's just unfortunate. It's just unfortunate. And then the Prodigy show, I don't think we're going to get anywhere near that. I have no interest in watching the Prodigy show at all. And that's my problem. I've said before, it's like, one of the things that I like about Discovery is the fact they still wear uniforms and are on a starship. It's like, well, what do we see in the season 3 trailer? Well, they crashed the Discovery, and most of the trailer they're running around not in uniform. It's like, okay, this is not Star Wars. Can we please stop doing this? But I guess we're not done doing that yet. So
you're not going to be done doing that as long as Kurtzman's in charge. And I'll tell you right now, as long as Kurtzman's in charge, you're not going to get what you want out of Strange New Worlds. I'll tell you that. James also has the problem that I have. He says, I can't get anything from that app on my PlayStation 4 either. Frowny face. Yeah, they've got to fix that. Regardless of what they call this thing, they have got to fix the PlayStation 4 app and get my Paramount movies on there, because I might have kept it for that with the commercials. Even though I don't want to have anything to do with New Trek, I might have kept it just so I could watch some of those Paramount movies. So, but it doesn't work. On my PlayStation 4, the movie tab is blank. Nothing.
Well, there you go. Talking about finding unusual things you didn't expect to see. Anybody else here remember Space Precinct? I guess it's available to watch on Amazon Prime. I discovered the other night looking for something else. I was like, friggin' Space Precinct? You can watch that? The guy from Knots Landing?
That's something that sort of I kind of like. I'm thinking, is it what I'm thinking, or is it something else?
Well, it's a Jerry Anderson production. Jerry Anderson did Thunderbirds, but he also did Space 1999. It was like in the 90s. It was like a cop show, with aliens and stuff in it, and the cop cars were kind of like spinners, and that they could fly. They did a lot of stuff with makeup effects and whatever, but it was like a show in the 90s. I think it only ran for like a season or two. I was just shocked to see it. I'd kind of almost forgotten about it, and I was like, oh yeah, Space Precinct.
Interesting.
There's an unusual thing you don't expect to find, and of course, because it's on Amazon Prime, it streams just fine. So
there you go.
Yeah, not all the services have issues, just some of the services have issues. So very cool.
With CBS All Access, they just never populated the movie tab. Just decided not to do it, even after they added all these Paramount movies to CBS All Access. Nope, can't watch them on PlayStation 4.
Well, that was the problem I had with DC Universe. The reason I canceled DC Universe, it was no simple way for me to stream Doom Patrol, for example, to my Samsung television. Are you kidding me? I can't just stream it to my television and watch it. I got to watch it on my phone. This sucks. Canceled.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there you go. All right. Do you have anything else for this episode, or we think we're good?
No, I'm good.
All right. Very cool. So we'll just go ahead and do the outro here real quick. So I want to thank you for watching, or hopefully listening to this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. I want to encourage you hopefully to go and check out some of our t-shirts we have available over at kirbytees.com. That's KIRBYTS.com. If you misspell that, it takes you to a place where they sell barbecue. You can still order barbecue from that place if you live in the area, but my real hope is that you'll go to kirbytees.com and check out some of our Retro Rogue shirts. Again, if you purchase any of those, it helps us support what we're doing here on the channel. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank also my co-host, Mr. Eric Alexander, for actually coming back here on the show, providing his unique insights and finding all these fun news articles and items for us, because the only ones I found were the ones he'd already found that he wanted to cover. So, Eric, please tell the folks, hopefully watching or listening at home, where they can learn more about you on the interwebs?
Well, I'm most active on Twitter, and that's at BassGod14, at BASSGOD14. That is also the official Twitch account, and that is also the official YouTube account for the Retro Rogues Live. Always appreciate any comments that you folks give. You actually gave some good suggestions today. There were several suggestions from the Rogues Gallery, and it's nice to always hear from the Rogues Gallery because we have no idea what happened last week and feel like we got shadow banned or something. But Manasan says, wonderful show as always, gentlemen. Manasan, great to have you here. Jane also says, great show. And we did miss Bobby earlier. He did say, I have to go to work early. Thanks for another great review. See you next week. And with that, we will leave our viewers with the last word.